Chapter 34:02. Emperor Primordial Chaos seemed to have thought of something, and he retreated again and again, withdrawing his attack. Using defense as offense. You want to exhaust my vitality? Emperor Primordial Chaos's eyes widened as he scolded. He knew that his vitality was insufficient. Raising it to the peak would certainly allow his combat power to soar, but his endurance would plummet. At that time, it would be Shiwen's time to counterattack. But the problem was that he understood this principle, but he couldn't avoid it. This was his fatal flaw, and he couldn't make up for it. You only realized it now? But I didn't think it would take until that time. Yi Shiwen roared, and instantly released 3,000 martial arts from his body, surrounding Emperor Primordial Chaos, not giving him any chance to escape. You think you can stop me with just this? Emperor Primordial Chaos roared, and the blood-colored spear in his hand kept pointing. Every time he pointed, several, even dozens of martial arts incarnations would explode. Yi Shiwen just snorted coldly, and he didn't say anything. The heavenly halberd in his hand suddenly slashed down. The crescent moon slashed down as if it was cutting off the world. Emperor Primordial Chaos looked up, and the spear in his hand pierced out, meeting the heavenly halberd. Clang! A huge roar exploded in the sky, turning into a terrifying sonic boom that spread in all directions. However, this attack was just the beginning, and it wasn't the end. Yi Shiwen lightly stretched his arms, and then suddenly pressed down. In an instant, the momentum of the heavens reversed, and a blazing light erupted, causing his great Tao to sublimate and shatter the world. Didn't you want to seize the universe creation palm? I'll let you see the power of the universe creation palm now. This palm fell, raised to the limit, and his palm was almost burning in order to burst out such a terrifying attack. Emperor Primordial Chaos roared, and all the vitality in his body was concentrated to the extreme. His body emitted countless visions, and instead of advancing, he retreated to meet Yi Shiwen's universe creation palm. Yi Shiwen, do you think this is the same as before? Emperor Primordial Chaos raised his strength to the limit in one breath, and forcibly took this palm. Boom! As this palm fell, Emperor Primordius felt the blood in his entire body boiling up and rolling up and down. The universe creation palm was simply too terrifying. It could actually allow Yi Shiwen to erupt with such terrifying combat power. However, he wasn't as powerless as before. The effect of raising his chi and blood for a short period of time was finally fully unleashed. Emperor Hun Yuan, come again. Yi Shiwen didn't stop in the slightest. He flipped his palm and slapped down again. At this time, Yi Shiwen was also determined. Although the best way was to delay the Primordial Chaos Emperor's vital energy and blood exhaustion, the heavens obviously wouldn't give him so much time. The return of Great Sun, an undying evil deity, was just around the corner. He didn't have that much time. At this moment, the king-level dragon vein in his body also started to burn. Compared to the beginning, it was a tenth less. When Yi Shiwen was in the Emperor realm, he still felt that this incomplete king-level dragon vein was a little inexhaustible. He felt that no matter how hard he tried, it would be difficult to exhaust it. But now, in just a short battle, this incomplete king-level dragon vein had significantly shrunk. This consumption was shocking enough, but he had no other choice. This was the price of erupting beyond his realm. It couldn't be sustained for long, but it could be used for a short period of time. Although it was only for a short period of time, it was enough for him. Again, a look of horror flashed in Emperor Primordius' eyes. He was very clear that to use a martial art like the universe creation palm, especially to erupt with such power, it would require a huge price. Every palm might require a huge amount of resources and wealth. It wasn't something an ordinary person could easily use. But looking at Yi Shiwen's situation, it wasn't just one or two palms. The wealth of his family was simply astonishing. Even when he was at his peak, he might not have dared to use the universe creation palm at will. It was only a short few tens of thousands of years. Obviously, he had a great encounter in the fortune realm. Otherwise, he wouldn't be like this. But at this time, he didn't have time to lament about Yishiwen's many encounters, because the universe creation palm slapped down again. Boom! Emperor Primordius directly stabbed the spear in his hand, blasting on Yishiwen's palm. He wanted to stab Yishiwen's palm on the spot, but he was blocked by the boundless nature palm, unable to take a step forward. With the protection of the boundless nature palm, Yishiwen was like a fish in water when he used it. Moreover, he could also release the power of the universe creation palm, which had a bonus effect. Otherwise, Yishiwen wouldn't have been so surprised back then. Buzz! The spear in Emperor Primordius' hand emitted a buzzing sound. Obviously, it was under great pressure. Emperor Primordius also took a few steps back before he finally dispelled this force. His chest felt a surge of blood, and he almost couldn't hold his breath and spat out a mouthful of old blood. Emperor Primordius could easily judge that the power of the second palm had increased a lot compared to the first palm at the beginning. With his shrewdness and intelligence, he immediately understood the reason behind it. Yishiwen didn't want to wait for the great sun Heavenly Lord and the undying evil Lord to return. These people's realms were indeed high, but what use was it? They didn't have enough blood, and the strength they could display was less than 1 in 10. Only the great sun Heavenly Lord and the undying evil Lord at their peak could threaten him, especially the undying evil Lord, whose realm was even higher than Yishiwen's. This was the biggest problem for him. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a bit sad. Since when did he become a soft persimmon in the eyes of others? But such thoughts only came out for a moment, and then disappeared without a trace. With a state of mind, it was impossible for him to be affected by such a thing. Moreover, Yishiwen's third palm had already fallen, so he had no choice but to go all out. This kind of fighting method was simple and crude, and it was simply to suppress the opponent with the power of the universe creation palm. Unfortunately, he had no way to break it. The simplest and most direct way was to break it with force. But now, the situation was not in his favor, and he could only forcefully endure. He knew Yishiwen's plan, but he didn't dare to dispel the power and blood he had raised. If he didn't do so, he might be killed by Yishiwen in a shorter time. Boom! 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 Yishiwen seemed to have gone mad, and he kept dropping the universe creation palm. This kind of invincible power made many of the surrounding heavenly lords feel chilled down their spine. This kind of simple and crude fighting method was the most troublesome because there was no way to solve it. He could only resist, and under such a situation where he had been imprisoned for so many years. Puff! After a series of collisions, Emperor Primordius finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood essence, which turned into a sky full of blood rain. Not good. Imperial Emperor Hun Yuan exclaimed his heart. He felt the world spin around him. As he spat out a mouthful of blood essence, the power and momentum that he had raised were completely destroyed in an instant. As the saying goes, once it dissipated, the consequences would be unimaginable. Without even thinking about it, he turned around and fled into the distance, forcefully enduring the dizzying feeling of the world spinning around him. Want to leave? Yishiwen's eyes burst with a terrifying light. He had used the universe creation palm many times in order to obtain such an opportunity. He had also consumed a lot of Dragon Vein's spirit energy. So, how could he fall short of success at the last step? What was the difference between that and a crushing defeat? One more strike, universe creation palm. Yishiwen backhanded and struck down. This palm condensed to the size of an ordinary palm, and it looked like it was flowing with a jade-colored light. But it was such an unremarkable palm that directly pierced through the space of this continent, broke out of the millions of miles of black cracks, and then fell on Emperor Primordius's body. Boom! With a loud bang, the big palm fell on Emperor Primordius's body. Puff! Emperor Primordius immediately spat out a mouthful of old blood, and then his whole body was torn apart, turning into a sky full of blood rain. It was already very difficult to resist, and at this time he suddenly couldn't protect the life essence, and was suddenly shattered. Moreover, he was beaten into a ball of blood rain, and not even a piece of his body could be preserved. It could be seen how terrifying Yi Shiwen's palm strike was at this time. Rumble. The entire world rumbled. This palm strike seemed to be able to pierce through the entire world. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to injure the primordial chaos sovereign, who was an extremely powerful existence. This blood rain that filled the sky scattered into the distance at an astonishing speed. This was Emperor Primordius trying to escape. Although, for an Empyrean, any drop of blood or cell could be reborn. In that case, even if he was reborn, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and his cultivation would be greatly reduced. Therefore, he could only flee with his body that had turned into a rain of blood. He was reluctant to give up the cultivation and accumulation he had accumulated over the years. Yi Shiwen only sneered as he saw this. His 5 fingers formed a fist, and endless golden light leaked out from between his fingers. This golden light instantly formed a 6 paths wheel that ruthlessly pressed down. I'll send you to samsara. As the 6 paths wheel smashed into Emperor Primordius, it instantly annihilated countless Empyrean Primordius's primordial spirits. Originally, it was extremely difficult to destroy an Empyrean's primordial spirit, but at this time, it was different. His mortal body had already been smashed to pieces. Without the protection of his mortal body, in a battle of the same level, only death awaited him. The primordial spirit was a person, and the mortal body was a ship. Without the protection of a ship, how could a person's strength contend with the raging winds and torrential waves? I'm not willing. Emperor Primordius screamed as he was directly annihilated. Chapter 34:03. Even if Emperor Hunyuan's spirit was strong enough to cross the long river of the Great Way with his spirit, he couldn't block Yi Shiwen's punch. How could the ordinary Great Way storm compare to Yi Shiwen's all-out attack? Emperor Primordial Chaos is dead. Emperor Primordial Chaos is dead. Many people's eyes widened, although there were already signs and trends when Yi Shiwen killed Honest Sage. When they saw Emperor Primordial Chaos die in Yi Shiwen's hands, they still felt a sense of sympathy for the loss of a rabbit. Were the younger generation now all so powerful and terrifying? Yi Shiwen annihilated the Primordial Chaos Emperor's soul with a single punch. Then, he grabbed the scattered blood rain from his corporeal body and put it into his inner world. Soon, he reverted to the appearance of the Primordial Chaos Emperor. However, he no longer had a soul. Only a corpse remained. Yi Shiwen floated in the sky. His expression didn't change, but he finally heaved a sigh of relief. His mortal enemy of tens of thousands of years was finally resolved. In his state of mind, a huge stone that was pressing down on his heart disappeared without a trace. There was no longer a shadow. Even though he didn't say anything, Emperor Hunyuan's strength still put a huge psychological pressure on him. Now such psychological pressure was swept away. It was no longer a shadow in his heart. This made him faintly feel like he was about to make a breakthrough in his realm. Am I going to break through to the 3rd realm soon? It seems like it won't be long. Yi Shiwen's face showed some joy. He originally thought that he would have to rely on the calamity breaking incense to break through to the 3rd realm. But now, it seemed that with the breakthrough in his state of mind brought by killing Emperor Hunyuan, it was only a matter of time for him to break through to the 3rd realm. Although he paid a huge price this time, the series of Universe Creation Palm consumed more than 1/3 of his incomplete king-level dragon vein. This was just the consumption of a battle. If this continued, even this incomplete king-level dragon vein wouldn't be able to withstand Yi Shiwen's astonishing usage speed. In general, it was still worth it. If he let Emperor Hunyuan escape, then he might have to pay a bigger price to eliminate him in the future, and he might not succeed. But what made him a little depressed was that these heavenly masters were poorer than the other. During this long life of imprisonment, they had already devoured most of the resources that could be devoured. What was left was some wealth that couldn't be consumed, which couldn't make up for Yi Shiwen's consumption. Yi Shiwen looked around. The only gain was a talisman called Taotai Decree in Emperor Hunyuan's inner world. Through this Taotai Decree, Emperor Hunyuan could directly transform those emperors and even heavenly masters captured by him into life source. He could directly devour them to replenish life's source and increase his own power. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. It should be known that both emperors and heavenly masters had laws to protect them. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to refine them. Even if it could be done, it would take a lot of time and a lot of supplementary materials. However, this Taodai decree was different. It could be directly devoured. This Emperor Hun Yuan obtained this Taotai decree in the past. He continuously devoured strong opponents along the way, constantly cooperating with them. He refined them into his own power through the primordial true power and advanced by leaps and bounds. Later, he broke through to the Emperor realm and Heavenly Master realm. If it wasn't for the Heavenly Gate tribulation, he wouldn't have been so embarrassed and eventually killed by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen couldn't search his memories. However, he could still infer a lot of information from his usual records. Emperor Hun Yuan had inquired about this Taotai decree ever since he had obtained it. This Taotai decree didn't seem to belong to any powerhouse that he knew so far. Yi Shiwen couldn't find it in his memories. It could even be traced back to an earlier time, before the Fortune God dynasty was established. However, he didn't know which super powerhouse it belonged to. It might even be an innate product. The establishment of the Fortune God dynasty had established a stable world. But at the same time, too many secrets were buried. With the flow of time, perhaps even the heavenly masters of the Fortune God dynasty didn't know many things. But no matter what, for Yi Shiwen, this Taotai decree was the biggest harvest. With this Taotai decree, he could completely refine the body of Emperor Hun Yuan into the source of life, and use it to increase his own power. In fact, it could even greatly shorten his practice time. Nowadays, experts were emerging in large numbers, and the older generation had returned. The calm before the storm was just like the calm before the storm. Yi Shiwen's hope of self-preservation was even greater now that he had this method. He might even be able to gain a foothold in the changing situation in the future. This was his greatest hope. After looking around, Yi Shiwen didn't stay here for long. He stepped on a ray of light and disappeared from the sight of many heavenly masters. At this time, many heavenly masters were slightly panting. At this time, they realized that they were overwhelmed by Yi Shiwen's aura. For them, this was simply an impossible miracle. However, it had indeed happened now. It wasn't just because of the formidable strength that Yi Shiwen had displayed. What truly terrified them was the fact that Yi Shiwen had killed without batting an eyelid. How could they not feel a chill in their hearts when they considered themselves as the seniors of Yi Shiwen? Not long after Yi Shiwen left, two figures came directly on a ray of light. Who else could it be but Heavenly Master Great Sun and Undying Evil Master? Both of them felt that there was a fierce battle here. It was because they felt it that they hurried back. However, by the time they arrived, the battle had already ended. This was completely out of their expectations. How could a battle between heavenly masters end so easily, unless the difference in combat strength was too great? Although these heavenly masters have been trapped for many years, their strength was still not something that ordinary people could compare to. How is this possible? At first, Heavenly Master Great Sun thought that these old fellows who had escaped were fighting to settle old grudges. But when they asked about the situation, Heavenly Master Great Sun was immediately shocked. Although he had received a warning from Purple Scorpion Old Ancestor and thought that he had raised his vigilance against Yi Shiwen to the highest level, he now realized that it was far from enough. Those were 4 heavenly masters. Although they weren't at their peak, they were already the top combat strength. They didn't fight one by one, but joined forces. Yet they were completely defeated by Yi Shiwen. How much effort did it take before they were completely annihilated? If it were him, it would be impossible to do it, and they had become heavenly masters at the same time. The difference between them was only 10,000 years. But it was in this 10,000 years, or even less than 10,000 years, that the gap between them had already widened to such an extent. Yi Shiwen didn't know much about these foreign heavenly masters who were killed by him. He even had a limited understanding of the Fortune God dynasty, let alone the foreign heavenly masters. However, for Heavenly Master Great Sun, they were all famous seniors. In the foreign heavenly masters, who knew how many people grew up listening to the legends of these matchless powerhouses, especially those who had inheritances like him. They often heard about some matchless powerhouses, and among them were the few that were killed by Yi Shiwen. If it were him, he probably wouldn't be able to defeat any of them, although it was not to the extent of being beaten up by Yi Shiwen in their current weakened state. It could only be said that they could barely protect themselves. It was simply impossible to defeat them, but Yi Shiwen did it. And not only did he defeat one of them, but he also killed all 4 of them. For a celestial master, it was more than 10 times more difficult to kill than to defeat. However, Yi Shiwen had accomplished it in a short period of time. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he thought of the disparity in strength that this represented. At this time, he carefully recalled the previous battle with Yi Shiwen. Not only did Yi Shiwen not use his full strength, but he also defeated him effortlessly, and his offensive didn't even pose any real threat to Yi Shiwen. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a little scared. Fortunately, it was under the environment of cooperation between the two sides. If it were in other circumstances, perhaps he would have died in Yi Shiwen's hands on the spot. Based on the current situation that Yi Shiwen was showing, it was really possible. He was definitely a cruel and merciless person. At this moment, he really felt that what his master said was right. Fortunately, this time he didn't intend to pretend to agree, but secretly oppose. With Yi Shiwen's character, it was really possible that he would kill him halfway and get rid of him together. Thinking of this, the eyes of the undying evil lord flickered constantly. Because of fear, because of anger. And next to him, the undying evil lord had a somewhat playful smile on his face. He had stayed in the Fortune God dynasty for a long time. If it wasn't for the fact that he was later exposed, he would have probably continued to hide. Therefore, his perspective of consideration was also different from the ordinary heavenly masters. Wu Zun, a little interesting. Yi Shiwen left the battlefield and immediately returned to the eastern continent to rescue the heavenly masters of the Fortune God dynasty who were trapped in it. Getting rid of an incomparable old enemy, Yi Shiwen could be said to have put down a big stone in his heart. Naturally, he entered into rescue mode wholeheartedly. Taking people's money to eliminate disasters, Yi Shiwen had received a lot of benefits previously. Now, it was finally time to help people eliminate disasters. When Yi Shiwen left, the War Elder had already rescued many heavenly masters of the Fortune God dynasty. After Yi Shiwen joined the rescue, the speed of the heavenly masters of the Fortune God dynasty was greatly accelerated. After a full 3 days, the heavenly masters of the Fortune God dynasty who were trapped in the eastern continent were finally all rescued, and they also embarked on the road back. Chapter 3404. 3 days later, Yi Shiwen and Warlord rescued the Celestial Masters who were trapped in the path of creation. Led by Celestial Master Vast Cloud, they followed Yi Shiwen and Warlord on their return journey. Since Yi Shiwen dealt with Emperor Primordial Chaos and the others very quickly, Warlord only rescued a few Celestial Masters when he returned. Due to Yi Shiwen's participation, the speed at which the two rescued the Celestial Masters had undoubtedly sped up a lot. When Yi Shiwen returned, even Emperor Primordial Chaos was taken aback. He was already prepared that Yi Shiwen might not make it back in time. After all, he also knew that Yi Shiwen went to kill a Celestial Master. Such a battle could drag on for any length of time. When a Celestial Master was angry, the earth and mountains would shake, the weather would change, and the galaxy would tremble. How could it end so easily? But now, Yi Shiwen returned in such a short time. This couldn't help but make him feel shocked. Looking at Yi Shiwen's appearance, he must have successfully killed Emperor Primordial Chaos. Otherwise, it shouldn't be like this. In his heart, he had a clearer understanding of Yi Shiwen's unfathomable skills. But what he didn't know was that Yi Shiwen didn't just kill Emperor Primordial Chaos. That was only a Celestial Master he killed on this trip. Otherwise, he wouldn't have thought so simply. Perhaps, he would have been extremely shocked. These Celestial Masters were trapped in various parts of this continent for many years. They didn't move for tens of thousands of years. They tried their best to maintain the lowest consumption and delay for time. Now, their delay was finally over. When they saw Yi Shiwen and Warlord appear, even those celestial masters with incomparably firm minds had a look of surprise on their faces. Soon, the team became bigger and bigger. The people in this team were basically famous big shots in the Fortune God dynasty. Any one of them was a big shot that shocked the world. Both of them had left behind a legendary story in the Fortune Divine dynasty. Most of them had seen, or at least heard of the existence of Warlord, but they really didn't know anything about Yi Shiwen. In their memories, they didn't even have the slightest bit of information about Yi Shiwen. Later, he learned from Zhan Zun that Yi Shiwen came from the myriad heavens. Moreover, he had been cultivating for 10,000 years. This made those celestial masters, who were used to seeing life and death, sigh with emotion. With their eyesight, how could they not see that Yi Shiwen's performance didn't seem like that of someone who had just entered the celestial master realm, especially when he was rescuing them? He had displayed many martial arts and magical powers at his fingertips. It was as if he had already entered this realm for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. In many people's hearts, this name was silently engraved in their minds. Yi Shiwen, a junior, had left a deep impression in their hearts with just a few words. Since they had cultivated to this level, it was naturally impossible for them to differentiate themselves based on the previous generation. However, they could still maintain the idea of being high and mighty because there was still a big gap between them and Yi Shiwen at this time. However, after a few more years, everything would be completely different. They were also very clear on this point. Therefore, even if they were older and had a higher cultivation level, the Heavenly Venerables did not underestimate this person in front of them. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen came to rescue them. In any case, they owed him a favor. Although it couldn't be considered as a life-saving grace, it was more or less the same. After confirming that everyone had been rescued, they finally embarked on their return journey. For these celestial masters, they also had mixed feelings. This place used to carry their hopes of obtaining good fortune. However, now it had become a cage that imprisoned them for countless years. Now that they had to leave, they couldn't tell what kind of feelings they had in their hearts. It was just that their mood was definitely not the same as before. Everyone quickly came to the ferry and collided with the Heavenly Venerables from the outer domain who had also returned from rescuing people. Under normal circumstances, when the Heavenly Venerables from both sides met, it would be inevitable that there would be a big battle. However, now, both sides tacitly chose to be silent and didn't fight. They, who were already not at their peak, couldn't bear the price of such a big fight. Were they going to die here after being rescued? Although they didn't fight, they still tacitly divided into two groups. The two camps faced each other from afar. But soon, the Heavenly Venerables of the Fortune God dynasty discovered that something was wrong. This was because they discovered that the Heavenly Venerables from the outer domain were more or less focused on Yi Shiwen, which made them feel very strange. Why did such a situation occur? It seemed completely illogical. In particular, their gazes were either filled with amazement, resentment, or vigilance. This was definitely not ordinary attention. Naturally, they were very puzzled in their hearts. However, they quickly learned what these Heavenly Venerables from the outer domain were doing through other means. After secretly passing information to each other, even they couldn't help but pay more attention to Yi Shiwen. Originally, they just thought that Yi Shiwen was just a new powerful junior in recent years. However, now they really discovered that this junior was simply too powerful. Which one of the Heavenly Venerables that he killed wasn't famous. Even they had heard of them. Even they didn't have complete confidence in winning against one of them. But now 4 of them actually died in Yi Shiwen's hands. This made their evaluation of Yi Shiwen rise to another level. Such a person already had the potential to be on an equal footing with them in the future. Now, he already had the ability to threaten them. This situation couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as before. Many people looked at Yi Shiwen in a different way. Yi Shiwen naturally didn't know that the Heavenly Venerables were secretly passing information to each other. However, when he saw the look in those Heavenly Venerables' eyes, he could more or less guess what was going on. However, he didn't care. At this point, there was no point in hiding his strength and biding his time. After all, in this world, one's fist spoke louder. With the return of this batch of heavenly venerables, the situation of the entire Fortune realm would also undergo earth-shaking changes. Whether it was the Fortune God dynasty or the Outer Domain, their strength would greatly increase. Wu Zun, you actually dared to violate our agreement and kill my Outer Domain heavenly venerables. Suddenly, heavenly venerable Great Sun roared. The earth trembled and the mountains shook. The sound waves swept towards Yi Shiwen like a wild knife. Yi Shiwen just glanced at it indifferently. This wild knife of sound waves dissipated without a trace. It couldn't even get close to him. Heavenly venerables were the rulers of this world. Wherever they looked, all darkness dissipated and all evildoers perished. When they opened their eyes, they created the world. When they closed their eyes, they destroyed the world. They had incredible power. So what? Do you want to fight? Yi Shiwen looked at heavenly venerable Great Sun indifferently. This time, there won't be any master to save you. If you want to die, I can grant your wish. Heavenly venerable Great Sun's face flushed red. Everyone immediately understood. This heavenly venerable Great Sun must have fought with Yi Shiwen previously and suffered a crushing defeat. For him to be pushed to this point, it could only be a crushing defeat and not something like a narrow defeat. Yi Shiwen glanced at heavenly venerable Great Sunday. He had no intention of saying anything. This heavenly venerable Great Sun was just relying on undying evil lord's presence to regain some face. It would be best if he could put a big hat on Yi Shiwen and make him bear the crime of starting a war between two factions. This was a good idea. Unfortunately, he still didn't understand. To emperors and cultivators below the emperor realm, starting a war that would result in the destruction of both sides was a huge crime. But to rulers like the heavenly venerables, this was nothing. In order to survive, Emperor Primordial Chaos and the others had killed countless emperors on the path of creation. Who would dare to criticize them? Who could criticize them? The so-called destruction of life was just a noun to these heavenly venerables. There were countless living beings in the creation realm. The death of tens of billions was just a drop in the bucket. If killing tens of billions of living beings could increase their cultivation by a realm, then they would likely do the same. To these heavenly venerables, not all of them, but most of them had the Great Tao as their number one goal. In order to obtain creation, they would do anything. The hatred between the two factions was as deep as the sea. It wasn't a natural hatred. From the perspective of the living beings at the bottom, it was to fight for survival space. To these heavenly venerables, it was to fight for resources that they spontaneously formed the two factions. In fact, it was unknown how many forces were divided within the two factions. And the people who decided all of this were none other than these heavenly venerables. So these accusations were nothing to these heavenly venerables. Heavenly Venerable's Great Sun was still too young. He, who had never truly reached the peak, wouldn't understand this point. But Yi Shiwen was different. Although he was much younger than Heavenly Venerable's Great Sun, he had once ruled over the heavens and realms. He was high above, and all living beings submitted to him. He understood the principles of governance and the principles of each faction. As for the other outer domain Heavenly Venerables, they were all looking down on the ground. It wasn't that they couldn't tell that the Great Sun Heavenly Venerable had the intention of borrowing power. If they were to send themselves to his doorstep now, they would really be stupid. If it was just an unimportant person, it wouldn't matter. But this guy in front of them had just slaughtered 4 famous Heavenly Venerables in their faction a few days ago. They also didn't want to lose their lives against such a ruthless guy who wasn't stingy with killing at the most critical time. For a moment, the entire scene was silent. It was like a vicious slap to the face of Heavenly Venerable's Great Sunday. Chapter 3405. Perhaps the Great Sun Heavenly Venerate didn't expect that his words would be completely useless. He originally thought that with the deep hatred between the two camps, a fight would break out soon. That damned Wu Zun would definitely be the target of public criticism and wouldn't be able to escape death. However, he had completely underestimated the wily old foxes of the outer domain heavenly venerates. Many of them might have a fiery temper, but it was absolutely impossible to say that they were fools. To the heavenly venerates, everything else was secondary. Everything was in service of their advancement to the highest Tao. In order to force the Fortune God dynasty to release the good fortune key, the heavenly venerates of the Fortune God dynasty dared to join forces with the outer domain heavenly venerates to fight against the rulers of the Fortune God dynasty. One could imagine what was truly important in their hearts. The outer domain heavenly venerates looked at the great sun heavenly venerate and then looked at Yi Shiwen. They couldn't help but shake their heads. They had also entered the heavenly venerate realm at about the same time. However, apart from the difference in strength, the most important thing was the difference in mentality and vision. In particular, those who had friendly relations with old ancestor Purple Scorpion shook their heads repeatedly. Although the great sun heavenly venerate seemed to be not bad, and his noble background had allowed him to cultivate smoothly until now. However, as the saying goes, it's not afraid of not knowing what's good, it's afraid of comparing goods. In comparison, the great sun heavenly venerate seemed completely weak. There was no comparison at all. However, they could only suppress such thoughts. After all, the great sun heavenly venerate was already outstanding enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the heavenly venerate realm. It could only be said that Yi Shiwen's performance was too monstrous to the point that even they were amazed. However, the great sun heavenly venerate didn't step forward to fight. He had fought once before, and the result wouldn't be any different if they fought again. He could only forcefully swallow his pride. There was no other choice. Both sides sat cross-legged on the ferry. There was no further communication, and no conflict broke out. Instead, they quietly waited for the arrival of the ferry. They weren't unfamiliar with that ferry. Suddenly, a thick fog appeared on the entire sea. Everyone stood up at once and looked over. Sure enough, after the fog passed, an incomparably huge ferry appeared in front of them. So. Everyone strode forward and appeared on the ferry. According to the original camp, they were divided into two groups, east and west. There were also different divisions within the camp. Those who were closer to each other naturally sat closer to each other. Not long after everyone sat down, the ship began to turn around, cleaving through the waves on the other side of the coast, just like it had been doing for millions of years. When the ship was less than halfway through, everyone suddenly opened their eyes. They seemed to have sensed something and quickly looked around. Sure enough, in the thick fog, a huge shadow appeared, constantly circling around the ship. This should have been a common sight, because they had been here more than once or twice. However, this wasn't the case. Soon, they discovered that something was amiss. There were more and more shadows in the thick fog. Although not all of them were as large as mountains, the approaching shadows still made the heavenly venerates nervous. This isn't good. I'm afraid that the expulsion barrier on this ship won't be able to stop these things. A heavenly venerate suddenly said. They had traveled to this sea many times in the past, so they had many speculations about this ferry. According to their speculations, this ferry was most likely covered with an expulsion barrier. This barrier was capable of expelling those filthy things, making it impossible for them to approach it. No matter how much they wanted to approach it, they didn't dare to. They also knew of similar methods, but the effects and temples were obviously inferior to the ones on this ferry. Moreover, in this sea of the dead, even the Empyrean smelting trial was greatly limited. It was impossible for them to see through everything like they could in the outside world. They hadn't even figured out what the shadows outside the thick fog were. Some people speculated that they might be the undead, or that the top experts who had died here had turned into corpses. However, some people didn't agree. They were all top experts who had grasped the death and darkness laws. If this was the case, they shouldn't have been unable to sense it. However, now that the shadows were approaching, it meant that the expulsion barrier on this ferry was no longer effective. Or rather, it couldn't stop them. At this time, They also understood that it was because so many heavenly venerates had appeared on the ferry. The surging vitality had attracted these evil beings. In the sea of the dead, we can't do anything, but on this ferry, it will be their grave. A heavenly venerate said coldly. He wasn't afraid. They had gone on countless expeditions in their lives and killed countless powerful enemies. How could they be afraid of something like this? When they were alone, they wouldn't have the slightest bit of fear. Moreover, there were so many heavenly venerates present. It would be very simple for them to make a hole in the sky. What was there to be afraid of? Most importantly, this ferry could withstand the all-out attacks of heavenly venerates. This was a very inconceivable thing. After all, it was impossible for a world to completely withstand the all-out attacks of heavenly venerates and wantonly destruction. However, this ferry could do it. 2 Empyreans had once fought on it, but when they finished fighting, they discovered that the ship was still the same as before. There wasn't the slightest change. They couldn't help but suspect that this ferry was actually a magic treasure. They didn't know who refined this magic treasure in which era. Suddenly, after a strange cry, a blood-colored figure suddenly rushed over. Its target was Venerate Misty Cloud, who was sitting on the side of the ferry. However, before this blood-red figure could approach Empyrean Misty Cloud, it was caught by a white palm. It was none other than Empyrean Misty Cloud. At this time, everyone saw that it was a monster that looked somewhat humanoid. However, it was crawling on all fours. There was no skin on its body, only blood-red muscles could be seen. Its eyes were extremely large, occupying half of its face. It had a scarlet face and fangs. It looked extremely ferocious and terrifying. Venerate Misty Cloud frowned slightly, and a look of disgust appeared on his face. His white palm suddenly clenched, and the monster that was slightly smaller than a human turned into a rain of blood. However, before this rain of blood could disperse, it was burned into nothingness by a flame. Everyone could clearly see the appearance of this monster. However, this was only the beginning. More and more blood-colored monsters jumped onto the ferry from the sea of undead. Although they seemed to be afraid of something on the ferry, it did not stop them from pouncing on the ferry in an overwhelming manner. It's just so. Yishuin pinched a blood-red monster to death, then took a big stride forward and flew above the ship's sail. He stood on a rail, and no one knew when a fiery red longbow had appeared in his hand. He pulled the bowstring to the fullest, and suddenly shot it out. A fiery red flaming arrow flew out and formed a fiery light. It directly nailed a blood-colored monster that flew over to the hull of the ship. The blood-colored monster screamed and struggled for a while. After that, it completely turned into flying ashes. Of course, this was not a martial instrument. It was a longbow formed by Yi Shiwen's own spiritual power. However, the longbow formed by his current spiritual power could have the power comparable to a Taoist instrument. It was extremely terrifying. It might be a little insufficient to deal with a venerate, but it was enough to deal with these monsters. Yishuin once again pulled the bowstring, and a fiery red ray of light shot out. Then, this fiery red ray of light instantly turned into a sky full of arrows and flew out in all directions. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. There was a sharp piercing sound. The sky full of arrows directly pierced various kinds of blood-colored monsters that flew up, burned them to ashes, or nailed them to the ferry. Every time the bow was pulled, a large group of blood-colored monsters could be killed. However, this was just the beginning. More and more blood-colored monsters were gathering. In addition to him, other venerates also made their moves. At this time, these blood-colored monsters were not targeting them alone. Instead, they were targeting them as a whole. They were still clear about the severity of the situation and joined forces to attack. Each of these Empyreans only needed to be in charge of guarding an area. With their abilities, this wasn't difficult at all. With the power of these Empyreans, those blood-colored monsters were instantly killed as soon as they appeared. These blood-colored monsters were not simple. Some even had the power comparable to the Emperor Lord. They could pose a fatal threat to an ordinary army. However, they encountered the most terrifying venerates. Moreover, there were more than one of them. Just one of them could kill them and prevent them from advancing, let alone a group of venerates. These people joined forces. If they were at their peak, even the god of creation would be defeated. However, the dignified expressions on everyone's faces did not disappear at all. On the contrary, they became even more dignified. This was because they all felt that this was just an appetizer. The real highlight was yet to come. Sure enough, soon, chief-level monsters that were obviously stronger than these blood-colored monsters appeared. The chief level of these blood-colored monsters was 4 to 5 meters tall. They were far stronger than ordinary blood-colored monsters. Moreover, their strength was also very terrifying. When it came to hand-to-hand combat, they could actually fight evenly with venerates. For a time, the entire fairy was in chaos. Chapter 3406. Boom, boom, boom. The entire fairy trembled violently. It was as if the entire world would explode and the stars would turn into powder. However, the entire fairy was still moving forward steadily. Not even the slightest fluctuation could affect it. It was precisely because they knew that there would not be too much of an impact that these extremely powerful celestial masters attacked recklessly. They were not afraid that the ship would sink and they would die in this sea of death. If the original blood-colored monsters were not a threat to them at all, then the leader of these blood-colored monsters was enough to cause considerable trouble for them. After they broke through, the blood-colored monster leader, who was quite tyrannical in terms of physical strength, could actually fight with the many celestial masters for a while. What was more terrifying was that there were more of them. These blood-colored monsters were endless. Now that the celestial masters were not in their peak state, they could not be compared to before. Hence, the situation was a bit of a stalemate. Fortunately, the celestial masters were rich in combat experience. Even if they tried their best not to use their chi, blood, and spiritual power, they could still kill in all directions. Yi Shiwen, who was standing on the rail, had another longbow in his hand. It was no problem for him to use both hands. He was like a mobile firepower fortress. Every time, a large number of arrows were shot out, killing those blood-colored monsters. Even the blood-colored monster leader was not his opponent. Because he was in his peak state, he did not need to be stingy with his chi, blood, and spiritual power. He could attack with all his strength. Because of this, his killing efficiency was very terrifying. Although he was not the most proficient in archery, everything was enough. In addition to him, Celestial Master Great Sun was also very active. It seemed that he wanted to make up for the previous humiliation. He desperately killed a large number of blood-colored monsters. Undying, Evil Master, and War Master were also on the front and back, killing these blood-colored monsters with all their might. The fairy sailed all the way to the other end of the sea of undead. At this time, the number of these blood-red monsters was decreasing, and it seemed that they were finally contained. However, at this time, loud battle cries came from the thick fog. Thousands of battle cries connected together, forming a battlefield filled with battle cries. At this time, everyone saw an army rushing out of the thick fog. Just like the blood-red monsters from before, they all had the same color as the blood-red monsters from before. However, this was an army, clad in iron armor and armed with iron spears. What dynasty's army is this? Why haven't I seen it before? Many heavenly venerables widened their eyes, seemingly unable to identify the origin of this army. This was a gathering of the most powerful and knowledgeable people in the world. If even they could not recognize it, then the origin of this army would be very strange. Although they were dressed in military uniforms, it wasn't difficult for Yi Shiwen to see that the clothing worn by this army was completely different from what he knew. Even the overall style was completely different. In the Fortune God dynasty, no matter how much time had passed, it was impossible to form two completely different cultural systems. But this time, they obviously did not have much time to think. Soon, this army had already rushed over. Fortunately, these heavenly venerables reacted quickly. They also had rich battle experience. No one was born a heavenly venerables. They had fought through bloody battles. In this case, their reaction was naturally very fast. Boom, 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 Deafening roars resounded as the celestial venerables on the ship clashed with this army. Compared to the blood-colored monsters from before, this blood-colored army was much stronger. They formed a formation and attacked, just like when they were alive. Their essence, chi, and spirit were completely connected. They could pose a threat to the heavenly venerables. This made the heavenly venerables even more curious. It should be known that the army that could pose a threat to the heavenly venerables was often elite to a terrifying extent. Even if they had not seen such an army with their own eyes, they should have more or less heard about it. How could they not know? Yi Shiwen drew his bow with both hands and continuously shot out countless arrows. However, his eyes were firmly fixed on the thick fog. There was an incomparably huge silhouette there. That incomparably huge silhouette was pacing back and forth, but it didn't approach, or perhaps it didn't dare to approach. Something was driving it away. Something was making it not dare to approach. Is it the ship itself? Or is it something else on this ship? Yi Shiwen thought about all kinds of possibilities, but his hands did not slow down at all. He continued to shoot arrows from both sides, killing the army. At the same time, there were also archers in the army. Tens of thousands of archers shot a rain of arrows, covering the bodies of the heavenly venerables. There was a series of clanking sounds. Although the arrows could not break the defense of the heavenly venerables, the blood on the arrowheads could miraculously corrode the spiritual power of the heavenly venerables. If there were more of these arrowheads, it was not impossible to cause harm to the heavenly venerables. However, this wasn't a big deal for Yi Shiwen. These arrows would automatically slow down when they fell in his time domain, so they wouldn't pose any threat to him. Instead, they would be shot by the rain of arrows and explode. Almost every second, Yi Shiwen could shoot a large number of arrows in all directions. It seemed to be infinitely powerful and extremely terrifying. Moreover, he could free up his hands to support the heavenly venerables of the Fortune God dynasty. As for the heavenly venerables of the foreign domains, they could only pray for themselves. In any case, this had nothing to do with him. In the agreement between the Fortune God dynasty and the foreign domains, there was no agreement regarding this. And at this time, when the fierce battle was in full swing, an incomparably terrifying aura locked onto the ferry. What was even more terrifying was that a figure as huge as a mountain finally walked out of the thick fog and arrived in front of them. This was a huge figure. His entire body was blood red, and he was wearing armor from an unknown dynasty. His eyes were like huge millstones, emitting a terrifying light. What was even more terrifying was that his head wasn't resting on his neck, but in his hand. A gigantic battle general with its head raised immediately attracted everyone's attention. What's the origin of this guy? Many heavenly venerables' hearts began to pound. During their peak, they were high-spirited and invincible. There was never a time when they were afraid. But now it was different from their peak. They cannot be mentioned in the same breath. This general gradually appeared, bringing an extremely terrifying, oppressive feeling to everyone. All the Empyreans had solemn expressions. This was practically a peak Empyrean, but how could they not have received any news of an existence of that level? How could they not have sensed anything at all? This was simply illogical. In other words, this person wasn't anyone they were familiar with. And at this time, just as everyone thought that they would go all out and a great battle would break out, the ferry suddenly reached the shore. It turned out that during this series of battles, the ferry had unknowingly crossed the sea of the dead. Everyone flew ashore without any hesitation. Sure enough, the head-wielding general didn't chase after them. It seemed that his range of activity was limited to this part of the sea of corpses, and he didn't go beyond this range. After reaching the shore, they were immediately safe. Without the blood-colored monsters and the endless attacks of the blood-colored army, they were able to breathe a sigh of relief. At that moment, everyone no longer had to rely on the ferry, so there was naturally no need to gather together. They all turned into streaks of light and flew far away from the path of creation. They were all very familiar with this place. Although countless years had passed, nothing had changed here. The laws of time seemed to have lost their effect here. Yishuwen and Zhanzun also sent out signals to the emperors of the Fortune God dynasty who had come to search for the law crystals. It was time for them to leave. Once these heavenly venerables left, the good fortune key would close the path of good fortune, and it would be impossible for them to leave. Fortunately, the emperors did not linger. They were well aware that they would only be here for a short period of time. It was impossible for them to stay here for a longer period of time. The heavenly venerables and emperors from the foreign domains and the Fortune God dynasty left the path of fortune through the Golden Bridge and returned to the Fortune God capital. The foreign emperors and heavenly venerables naturally did not want to stay here for even a moment. It was not only because they were from different camps, but also because they felt like there was a fishbone stuck in their throats. If the Fortune God dynasty launched a surprise attack at this time, there was a possibility that they would be completely wiped out. This was because the Fortune God dynasty had also sent many heavenly venerables this time. In terms of numbers, they did not have the advantage. Moreover, this was the Fortune God dynasty's headquarters. Coupled with the many enchantments and array formations, the Fortune God dynasty had the strength and ability to do so. Therefore, they could not wait to leave. Some of the more cautious ones even flew directly into the boundless starry sky and returned to the foreign domains. But the strange thing was that the Fortune God dynasty, which they suspected of doing something, did not take any action. They allowed these heavenly venerables and emperors to return to the foreign domains, as if they had kept their word. But everyone was very clear that in the face of real benefits, credibility was not worth mentioning. If they could capture all these foreign heavenly venerables in one fell swoop, then the foreign domain's vitality would be greatly damaged. They might even be unable to recover from this setback. This seemed like a wonderful prospect. After the foreign heavenly venerables and emperors left, the Fortune God dynasty's heavenly venerables also prepared to leave. They had been away from the Fortune God dynasty for too long and were eager to return home. There were too many people who were looking forward to their return. Chapter 3407. Both of you, if you need any help in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. As long as it is within my capabilities, I will not hesitate to help. At this time, the Celestial Masters bid farewell to Yi Shiwen and the Warlord. This time, they owed the two a huge favor. They also said that as long as Yi Shiwen and the Warlord's request was not too excessive, they would agree. He had saved her life. No matter what, it couldn't be overstated. As for the favor owed to the Fortune God dynasty, it was another matter. They would repay it in other ways, and this was necessary. A force could be untrustworthy, but it was necessary for them to keep their word. Otherwise, the next time something happened, they might not be able to get any reinforcements. This was the scariest thing about it. Ha ha, Taoism friends, have a safe journey. If there is any need in the future, I will not be lenient. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and laughed. Have a safe journey, Taoism friends. The warlord also cupped his hands and said. At this time, after saying goodbye to the two, they also said goodbye to the Eastern Celestial Master and the Space-Time Heavenly Master who were guarding here as representatives. They could not wait to leave. Of course, there were also a few who belonged to the direct forces of the Fortune God dynasty itself. However, they also had their own tribes and sects, so they had to return. Looking at these people leaving, Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion because he knew very well that the return of these celestial masters would set off a new round of reshuffling in the Fortune God dynasty. Would those celestial masters who returned to the major regions have a huge conflict with the rising local forces? Even in the Eastern region, there were several celestial masters who returned this time. Originally, the power structure in the Eastern region was led by the Eastern Celestial Palace, followed by the Heavenly Taoism, then the Silver Moon Clan, and then the newly rising human race. These four forces were almost the strongest in the entire Eastern region. They basically divided the big and small interests in the Eastern region. The other forces could only rely on these four forces to survive. As a newly emerged force, the human race was considered the weakest. In the upcoming shuffle, it would definitely be the most disadvantageous. If the returning heavenly venerates wanted to regain their former authority, the weakest human race would undoubtedly be the easiest link to break through. This kind of situation happened everywhere. Even the Fortune God dynasty was no exception. Among the people who returned this time, there was no lack of the original East, South, West, and West heavenly venerables, and even middle heavenly venerables. The replacement of the old and new heavenly venerables and the competition for benefits would cause the entire Fortune God dynasty situation to become complicated and confusing. In fact, Yishuan didn't understand why the current space-time heavenly masters and the others would agree to let the original heavenly masters return and break the existing power structure. In particular, the original 4 great heavenly masters of the North, South, East, and West could directly threaten their authority. There must be something he didn't know yet. Fortunately, although these celestial venerates had returned, they were no longer at their peak after being trapped for so many years. There wasn't any spiritual energy in the path of creation, so they couldn't recover even if they wanted to. They could only weaken bit by bit. It wasn't something that could be done in a short period of time. Moreover, he had participated in the rescue of the celestial venerables. Even the Eastern region celestial venerables owed him a big favor. At the very least, they wouldn't directly attack the human race before this favor was used up. All of this had bought Yishuan some time, allowing him to have the ability to adapt to the upcoming chaos. As long as he entered the third realm, it would be equivalent to standing on the same starting line as the majority of the celestial venerables. Although they would have an advantage, in the short term, Yishuan would be able to stand on equal footing with them. In fact, with his cultivation path of the 3,000 martial path, once he cultivated to the third realm, he would be able to surpass most third realm emperors. If he cultivated to the peak of the third realm, he would be able to crush all competitors. This would make him an outstanding figure among the celestial venerables. Apart from those celestial venerables who had already broken through, he was the strongest and invincible. In the upcoming turmoil, at the very least, he would be in an invincible position. There was nothing to be afraid of. In fact, he could even take the initiative to launch an attack and eradicate Divine Fire Divine Lord. After beheading Emperor Hun Yuan, Divine Fire Divine Lord had become the strongest threat to Yishuan. In this regard, Yishuan had already come up with many plans to eradicate him. However, the premise of all of this was that he could enter the third realm. Otherwise, everything would be equivalent to wasting his time. Originally, he still needed a lot of time. However, this trip to the path of creation, especially the battle with Emperor Hun Yuan and the other 3 celestial venerables, had greatly benefited him. The time needed to truly enter the third realm had been greatly reduced. This was another advantage that he had gained. Who knows how many storms will be stirred up next? Zhan Zun sighed. With his strategic vision, how could he not see what was about to happen? However, there were many things that he couldn't control with his current strength. Yes, Yishuan thought a lot. The current human race was still too weak. Although they had made rapid progress in recent years, it was still fine during times of peace. However, in the upcoming chaotic times, it was inevitable that they would be a little powerless. The key to this was him. The stronger he was, the stronger the human race would be. If he were to fall, the human race would also be beaten back to its original state. In fact, it might even be massacred by many angry people. Therefore, he had no way out, and he couldn't retreat. After completing the path of creation, Yishuan didn't stay in the divine capital of creation for long. Instead, he directly returned to Buzhou's sacred mountain to undergo closed-door training in order to break through to the third realm. However, at this time, a great uproar was set off in the Fate realm because of the return of these celestial venerables. Although this operation of the Fortune Divine Dynasty was carried out with great fanfare, only those who were relatively close to the Fortune Divine Dynasty, those who were core tribes in the outer domain, and those with celestial venerables were aware of this operation. For the outside world, all of this was still an extremely secretive operation. Because of this, when these celestial venerables collectively returned, it was easy to imagine the storm that was set off. No one had expected that in just one night, so many celestial venerables would suddenly appear. The situation of the entire Fate realm was greatly affected. Many forces in various large domains were affected, especially the forces that were adjacent to the tribes and sects of these returning celestial venerables. However, the forces and tribes that originally had celestial venerables were also greatly impacted. Their originally high and mighty status was also greatly threatened. This was especially true for the super sects and super powerful clans that had Empyreans overseeing them. Their forces were constantly weakening, and a large region couldn't accommodate too many super sects and super powerful clans. If there were too many competitors, the benefits they could receive would also sharply decline. For them, this was also a huge test. For the Fortune Divine Dynasty's celestial venerables, at least in name, they still had a common ruler. Under the suppression of the East, South, West, and West celestial venerables, they didn't have the time to erupt. Especially those celestial venerables who had just returned were working hard to restore their strength. They were well aware that only with tyrannical strength could they stand tall. Therefore, the current situation could be considered calm, and there were no violent conflicts. However, the tribes and sects that had celestial venerables were in high spirits, as if they were welcoming the return of their heavens. In fact, this was also the case. Having or not having a celestial venerate was a completely different concept. Without a celestial venerate, they were just ordinary tribes and forces that were in a precarious situation. But with a celestial venerate, they suddenly became super sects and super powerful tribes. They didn't need to be afraid of other people's threats. This was something they were very clear about. Many years ago, they were also super sects and super powerful tribes. While undercurrents were surging within the Fortune Divine Dynasty, they were still able to maintain their calm on the surface. On the other hand, the outer domains couldn't help but start fighting. In the Stormy Sea region, a returning celestial venerate ancestor learned that his tribe had been invaded while he was trapped in the path of fortune. The pure bloodline of his tribe had been wiped out, and only some subspecies with a certain bloodline were left. Even so, there were only 2 or 3 of them left, and they lived in fear. This ancestor flew into a rage on the spot. He uprooted the tribes that were involved in this matter one by one. In one night, he massacred 13 tribes that had emperors. But it was useless. In front of a celestial venerate, their pillar, their heavens, and their emperors couldn't withstand a single blow and were directly crushed to death. Blood flowed like a river. It was unknown how many lives had been slaughtered. After learning that his tribe had been annihilated, this celestial venerate ancestor erupted with violence. It was many times more terrifying than Pantheon Venerate's previous massacre. In the end, this celestial venerate ancestor went to look for the mastermind behind all this. It was another super powerful tribe that had a celestial venerate. He killed his way to their doorstep, creating mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Even several emperors were crushed to death, not to mention those below the quasi-emperor realm. Such a terrifying massacre finally alarmed the celestial venerate who was in seclusion. For a time, 2 celestial venerates broke out in an earth-shattering battle. All the creatures in the Stormy Sea region trembled under the attacks of these 2 peerless powerhouses. The battle lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. Finally, the returning celestial venerate ancestor was defeated and fled. After all, he was no longer at his peak. However, that super powerful tribe didn't fare well either. After such a massacre, their vitality was greatly damaged and their strength was greatly reduced. If it weren't for the celestial venerate ancestor, their entire tribe would have been greatly affected. However, this was just the beginning. Chapter 3408. This change set off a great uproar in the fortune world. However, this change was just the beginning for the entire fortune world. As this batch of older heavenly venerables began to voice their opinions, the entire fortune world was filled with all kinds of chaos and battles. Although this batch of older heavenly venerables was still licking their wounds and lying dormant to recover their strength, no one was naive enough to think that they would endure forever. As time passed, The return of this batch of older heavenly venerables would inevitably set off a new wave of tempestuous waves. The competition between the two sides would also become more and more intense until a new balance was reached. The competition for resources between the heavenly venerables would also become more and more serious, especially the older heavenly venerables. In order to recover, they would need a massive amount of resources and wealth. These resources would not appear out of thin air and would inevitably have a huge impact on the existing situation. Subsequently, several major incidents occurred. These were all conflicts between the heavenly venerables who had returned from the Road of Fortune and the heavenly venerables who had remained in the Fortune world. As the original batch of heavenly venerables were trapped in the Road of Fortune, the heavenly venerables who had remained in the Fortune world often occupied benefits that far exceeded their strength and forces. Compared to the previous situation, it was much more comfortable. But now, this situation was bound to change. After all, these returning heavenly venerables also needed to have their own base. However, no one would take the initiative to give up their own benefits. Hence, open and covert struggles were bound to happen. Fortunately, no heavenly venerables from the Fortune God dynasty took action in these matters. Or perhaps, with the Fortune God dynasty suppression, no one dared to act so presumptuously, whether it was the heavenly venerables who had remained in the Fortune world or the heavenly venerables who had returned from the Road of Fortune. However, everyone knew that this was just the calm before the storm. The Fortune God dynasty was able to suppress everything because of its formidable strength. This time, several heavenly venerables belonging to the Fortune God dynasty had returned from the Road of Fortune. This had more than doubled the Fortune God dynasty's strength. Anyone who dared to disobey them could be suppressed with a flip of their hand. The strength of individual sects and tribes was even more vulnerable in front of the Fortune God dynasty. It could be said that the Fortune God dynasty's prestige had deepened after this incident. Although the strength of the Fortune God dynasty's people had increased a lot overall, it was still far from being comparable to the imperial court. This was also the reason why the Fortune God dynasty was pushing for this matter. To the Fortune God dynasty, this matter had more advantages than disadvantages and could be completely ignored. After this incident, the various sects and races did not dare to disobey the Fortune Divine dynasty's orders. On the surface, the Fortune Divine dynasty seemed to have recovered its former glory. However, everyone knew that this was merely the surface. In truth, the internal strife within the Fortune Divine dynasty had never ceased. The four Empyreans of the North, South, East, and West, as well as the rising star Empyrean of space-time, had been fighting for the position of Empyrean of the Middle Empyrean and plotting for the position of Supreme Empyrean. Although it was impossible for him to reach the power and influence of the good fortune Heavenly Lord, with his position as a Middle Heavenly Lord, he could command the world and become a Supreme Heavenly Lord above all Heavenly Lords. He was vaguely like another good fortune Heavenly Lord. It was precisely because of this that the benefits of having such power and influence were unimaginable. Coupled with the Fortune Divine dynasty's destiny, he could soar to the sky in the future and become a true Heavenly Lord. It was not impossible for him to become the next good fortune Heavenly Lord. Therefore, the internal strife between the Heavenly Lords of the Fortune Divine dynasty was inevitable until a new balance was reached. Perhaps someone would stand out from the rest and become a Middle Heavenly Lord. Once a large-scale internal strife broke out in the Fortune Divine dynasty, it might give an opportunity to outsiders. Although the possibility was not high, it was still something everyone was looking forward to. From the looks of it, all that was missing was an opportunity. However, the current Yi Shiwen was sitting on a fishing platform. He was sitting on the favors of many heavenly lords, so he could laugh at the world's turmoil. Although these favors would eventually run out, the human race was currently diligently cultivating their internal strength and was not expanding their territory. As a heavenly lord, it was a matter of course for him to occupy 11 prefectures. Whether it was Heavenly Dao or the Silver Moon clan, they were far superior to the human race. Naturally, the human race would not become the target of public criticism. As long as they did not participate in the chaos, they could naturally become a paradise in the midst of the storm. Now, on a cloud platform in the divine court, Yi Shiwen was sitting on a cloud bed. Below him, the emperors of the human race and the emperors who had pledged allegiance to the human race were sitting cross-legged on the cloud bed. Obviously, they were not just a head shorter than Yi Shiwen. If Yi Shiwen's original status in the human race was based on his strength and contributions to the human race, then after he entered the heavenly lord realm, there was a real distinction between the primary and secondary positions. The others didn't even have the qualifications to call him fellow Taoist and could only respectfully call him senior. Yi Shiwen looked around. In addition to the original 3 emperors, Fengyi clan, the human emperor, and the sword monarch, the human race had several new emperors in recent years. In addition, there were the emperors who had surrendered to the human race, as well as the emperors of the powerful clans and sects in the 11 prefectures who had surrendered to the human race. There were more than 30 emperors. This was the largest force that the human race had now. Compared to the early years, there were only 2 or 3 emperors. The strength of the human race was constantly accumulating and growing in such a process. Among these people, only the sword monarch was a new face. Although he was one of the emperors of the human race, he devoted himself to the sword principle. Unless the human race encountered a crisis of extinction, he basically walked in the outer space all year round, practicing in the chaos. His cultivation was extremely high, far higher than the human emperor and Fengyi clan. Now, he had also entered the emperor's 7th realm. Later, when he heard that the human race had a heavenly lord, he came back to visit. Yi Shiwen also had a very deep understanding of the sword principle. He had given a lot of guidance, which made the sword monarch feel that he had gained a lot. In addition, he had enough experience outside the human race, so he stayed. Originally, there were only 2 or 3 people in the human race. The loss of one person would have a huge impact. However, it was different now. The forces of the human race were spread all over the 11 prefectures. In the entire eastern region, the existence of 100 people was a big deal. Not to mention, at the top, there was Yi Shiwen suppressing the 8 directions. The power of the human race was as stable as Mount Tai. Now, it was Yi Shiwen who was preaching to the emperors. He did not hide anything, and spoke out many of his insights about the emperors. Although the Tao that each emperor walked was unique, and even if there were similarities, it could not be the same. However, Yi Shiwen was different. He had a wide range of knowledge. The cultivation method of the 3,000 martial paths, which he had created himself, was simply a bug. In many martial paths, he had amazing insights. In any martial path, he was far better than these emperors. He could casually give pointers to these emperors. Although the consumption was great, and every step forward required 100 times the resources of others, once he succeeded, his skills would almost be the best in the same realm. He would be invincible, and his foundation would be incomparably solid. As the saying goes, a tall building starts from the ground. The foundation he had laid was far better than ordinary people. If ordinary people could build 100 floors, then he could build 1,000 floors, or even 10,000 floors. To these Empyreans, his sermon was like an epiphany. Many puzzles that they had been unable to solve in their cultivation were instantly solved. Many people were on the verge of breaking through on the spot. These were all benefits that they had accumulated over the years. Whether or not a heavenly venerate was a completely different matter. This was especially true for the sovereign emperors of the foreign races and independent cultivators. They felt that having a backer was completely different. Without a heavenly venerate, they could only fumble about in their cultivation. Every step they took required detours, wasting a lot of time and resources. However, they could avoid taking a wrong path if they had the guidance of a heavenly master. Especially, Yi Shiwen was an erudite and knowledgeable martial arts great master. He could give them many incisive suggestions. In fact, each of his words could directly point to the essence of their cultivation. So, it was impossible to say that they had gained a lot. In fact, It could only be compared with the accumulation of many fortuitous encounters. Apart from the human race, many other emperors of foreign races and individual cultivators were also convinced by Yishuan. They wouldn't have the slightest thought of rebelling because Yishuan treated them with sincerity and didn't hide anything from them. Whatever the human emperor could enjoy, they could also enjoy. Since the human emperor could listen to Yishuan's preaching, they could also listen to Yishuan's preaching. Yishuan treated them equally. They could be unconvinced by other emperors, but they could only be convinced by Yishuan from the bottom of their hearts. Yishuan was already at a different level from them, not only in terms of cultivation, but also in terms of breadth of mind. Many people seem to see the great figure who unified the fortune god dynasty countless years ago. He was also like this. He treated all races equally, united all races under his command, and served him with their lives. Even many foreign creatures fought for him under the command of the fortune god lord. They changed their bloodline and got rid of the restrictions and restraints of the foreign creatures. However, after the fortune god lord, no one had such breadth of mind, but Yishuan did. In his heart, he was the supreme celestial master of the human clan and also the lord of the 11 provinces. These were all his subordinates. Although there was a difference between them, there was no essential difference. The human race was his base. However, it was unrealistic for him to rely on the human race alone if he wanted to advance further. Since ancient times, no one had reached the pinnacle by relying on the power of a single race. That kind of thinking was too narrow-minded. He understood this very well. The fortune god lord was like this, the Qin emperor was like this, and it was the same for him. Chapter 34:09. He was broad-minded enough to accommodate the many heroes of the 11 prefectures to serve him. During this period of time, he had brought a lot of benefits to the 11 prefectures, especially the human race, which was his base. They had received the majority of the benefits, and their strength had improved by leaps and bounds. However, this did not mean that he had not benefited at all. Now that the 11 prefectures were considered to be in the preliminary stage of integration, every year, many good things would be offered as tributes from all over the 11 prefectures. Apart from a portion that had to be handed over to the fortune god dynasty, the rest were basically cultivation resources for the various big shots. Because the territory had expanded and there were more people, the tributes were getting better year after year. Many of them were even useful for heavenly masters like Yishuan. There were also some elixirs, heavenly treasures that could increase cultivation, and so on. Yishuan's doppelganger, Sword Master, had already cultivated to the peak of the first realm in a short period of time. As long as he consolidated a little, he would be able to step into the second realm. After all, Sword Master was not like his real self, who had tens of thousands of years of accumulation. Therefore, it was impossible for him to reach the peak of the first realm as soon as he entered the heavenly master realm. Moreover, no one knew that it was not Yishuan himself who was preaching to these emperor lords, but his doppelganger, Sword Master. Yishuan's real self was in closed-door cultivation, preparing to break through to the third realm in preparation for the upcoming turmoil of the fortune god dynasty. At that time, with the favors he had accumulated, coupled with his cultivation of the third realm, he would truly be as stable as Mount Tai, unafraid of the wind and rain. As long as both his true body and his clone were present, they would appear separately. This way, no one would be able to recognize him. Given his realm and comprehension, even if he wasn't his true body, it would be more than enough for him to explain the Tao to these imperial lords. Moreover, he could share his memories and experiences with his true body. Whatever his true body understood, he understood as well. It was only because he wanted to walk a different path from his true body that he abandoned everything else and chose the Tao of the sword. His lecture was very ordinary. There were no heavenly flowers falling from the sky, but it was even more shocking. Every single sentence he said contained the essence of the great Tao. Other than some comprehension of the heavenly Tao, he also talked about the cultivation methods of the sovereign emperors. This made many of the sovereign emperors feel that they had gained a lot. They didn't need to fumble around on their own. Instead, they had someone to guide them from the front. This feeling was very good. This was also the reason why those idle emperor lords were willing to rely on the human race. In addition to enjoying the supply of resources, they also had the opportunity to listen to the emperor lord's teachings, which greatly reduced the possibility of taking the wrong path. Suddenly, Sword Master, who was preaching, stopped. All the emperor lords instantly woke up from that mysterious state and looked at Sword Master with some doubts. Is this the end of this preaching? At this moment, Sword Master waved his hand, and many of the formations above the divine court were removed. Then, everyone felt a wave of heaven's wrath condensing. They cannot be more familiar with it. This was the boundless heaven's wrath that would be produced when one was about to cross the Emperor Tribulation. However, compared to when they were crossing the Emperor Tribulation, this heaven's wrath looked more powerful. It also showed that the person who was about to cross the Emperor Tribulation was different. However, the formation set up in the Divine Court could not only defend against the enemy's surprise attack, but also isolate the aura. Cultivating here, there was no need to worry about a heaven's wrath appearing at any time. This was a method to deceive the heaven. It was indeed very amazing. However, it could even deceive the Emperor Tribulation. It showed that Yi Shiwen had made great progress in the Tao of formations over the years. It was enough to match his identity as a celestial lord. After the formation was removed, a figure suddenly flew out. Everyone present was either an emperor or a heavenly venerable. They were well-known figures among the trillions of living beings. Their eyesight could penetrate the heavens and penetrate the earth. So, they naturally saw this person very easily. This person was none other than Yi Shiwen's eldest disciple in the fortune world. She was also the current supreme leader of the divine court, Bian Xiaoye. Yi Shiwen rarely cared about these idle things. Therefore, after Bian Xia entered the quasi-emperor realm, he handed over the position of the supreme leader of the divine court to her. As the eldest direct disciple of the celestial lord, Bian Xiaoye could even sit on the same level as ordinary emperor lords when she went out. As the saying goes, even if you don't care about the monk, you should at least care about the Buddha. Now, it was finally time for Bian Xiaoye to cross the Emperor Tribulation. Not long after she entered the quasi-emperor realm, Yi Shiwen personally took her to experience the heavens tribulation of the celestial lord. Therefore, she had a lot of insights. It didn't take long for her to enter the peak quasi-emperor realm. And now, she finally triggered the Emperor Tribulation and was about to enter the Emperor realm. All the Emperor Lords looked solemn because they had all crossed the Emperor Tribulation before. Naturally, they were very clear about how terrifying the Emperor Tribulation was. However, compared to them, Bian Xiaoye, who was a Celestial Lord's disciple, was undoubtedly luckier. With Yi Shiwen's guidance and help, her chances of becoming an emperor were much higher. However, the heavens tribulation she had to face was much more terrifying than others, because the cultivation technique she practiced was more powerful. The heaven was fair. The more powerful the person was, the more terrifying the heavens tribulation he had to face. Once he passed the heavens tribulation, his cultivation would be more powerful. In just a moment, Bian Xiaoye flew into the stars. Undergoing the heavens tribulation in the divine court would probably cause great harm under the might of the heavens tribulation. All the emperor lords and sword master looked through the layers of space and endless starlight and saw the woman walking in the galaxy of the universe. At this time, Bian Xiaoye no longer had the temperament of a peasant girl. Every move she made was like a leader of a region. Walalala! Countless thunder rain fell. Although it wasn't as powerful as when Yi Shiwen crossed the heavens tribulation, it was undoubtedly much more terrifying than when ordinary emperor tribulation. Therefore, many people were very nervous. Only the sword sovereign was an exception. Although he was not present, his gaze was still extremely sharp. Even the tens of thousands of lightning dragons that fell from the sky were within the range of his eyes. He also knew how much damage they could cause and how much power they could cause. Moreover, he had taught Bian Xiaoye for many years. Naturally, He was very clear about Bian Xiaoya's strength. Before crossing the Heaven's Tribulation, Bian Xiaoya had done a lot of homework. At this time, it seemed to be very dangerous, but in fact, it was still within Bian Xiaoya's tolerance range. Moreover, the Heaven's Tribulation had just begun. If she couldn't even resist the Heaven's Tribulation at the beginning, then there was no need to say anything later. Sure enough, although the Heaven's Tribulation was fierce, Bian Xiaoya easily resisted it. In the Heaven's Tribulation, she was invincible. She didn't care about this level of Heaven's Tribulation at all. The Heavenly Tribulation was endless, and this was just the beginning. Bian Xiaoya had just defeated one wave, and another wave pounced on her. Behind them, all kinds of lightning beasts and powerful martial arts experts pounced on her. At this time, Bian Xiaoya had just encountered some trouble, but it was not enough to threaten her. At this time, she only used a pair of bare palms. Her white palms flew up and down, beating these fierce beasts and martial arts masters who rushed up to her. They constantly collapsed, unable to get close to her. Sometimes she could even transform into the magical power of 3 heads and 6 arms. She used a pair of white palms to seal the surrounding airtight, completely protecting herself. In fact, even if a lightning tribulation were to land directly on her, it would not be able to do anything to her defense. This was because the great Azura body that she had cultivated had already reached an extremely high level. She was practically invincible among those of the same cultivation level, and nothing could harm her. However, with the passage of time, the Heaven's Tribulation also gradually became more intense. Bian Xiaoya simply relied on a pair of white palms to defend herself. She gradually began to become a little embarrassed. At this time, the Heaven's Tribulation had also entered the intermediate stage. The power of the Heaven's Tribulation was also getting stronger and stronger. Many people had never heard of the Heaven's Tribulation before. Naturally, it was inferior compared to the Heaven's Tribulation that Yi Shiwen had crossed. However, it was still very terrifying. Swordmaster immediately retracted his gaze and didn't continue to watch. He wouldn't intervene. No matter what kind of problem she would face, it was a problem that she had to solve. Yi Shiwen had come all the way in the past. Even what he faced at that time was far more dangerous than Bian Xiaoya. The most important thing was that he didn't have a celestial master to rely on. Even those human tribulations that were eyeing covetously, Yi Shiwen wasn't prepared to intervene. Since it was a tribulation, he would let it have a good time. Bian Xiaoya was already different from when Swordmaster crossed the Heaven's Tribulation. Swordmaster just re-achieved Tao. With his deity present, many steps could be skipped. However, Bian Xiaoya was different. She had to experience all the process personally. Even if it was a narrow escape, she could only experience it personally. Furthermore, the things that he had obtained through his personal experiences were not things that could be obtained through other channels. If Yi Shiwen secretly helped, then the things that he could obtain would be greatly reduced. Moreover, if she couldn't even stop this level of Heaven's Tribulation, then Bian Xiaoya would be too disappointing to Yi Shiwen. Seeing that Yi Shiwen retracted his gaze and continued to preach, the other emperors also retracted their gazes and listened to the lecture with peace of mind. In any case, she was Yi Shiwen's own disciple. He didn't care about what they could say. Soon, everyone was immersed in Yi Shiwen's preaching again. They only felt that every word he said had traces of the great Tao. It made them feel enlightened, and they were immersed in it. After an unknown period of time, the Heaven's Tribulation in the sky finally dispersed. Bian Xiaoya, who had crossed the Heaven's Tribulation, returned to the Divine Court. She finally became the first empress of a human race in the Fortune world. Chapter 34:10. Although there were human empresses in the myriad heavens, this was the first time there was one in the human race of the Fortune domain. However, in the eyes of many, this was only a matter of time. After all, there was a heavenly master behind her. As long as there were no major problems, it was almost certain that she would advance to the Emperor realm in the future. It was nothing more than a problem of the Heavenly Tribulation. How could a heavenly master let anything happen to his disciple? although she could only rely on herself to overcome the heavenly tribulation. With Yi Shiwen's imparting experience, Bian Xiaoya's probability of success would naturally increase greatly. After Bian Xiaoya overcame the heavenly tribulation, she went straight to the dojo where Yi Shiwen preached. Yi Shiwen preached about the Emperor realm. Those below the quasi-emperor level were not qualified to listen to the preaching because it was useless even if they listened. Their realm had not reached the required level, so there was no use at all. Seeing that Bian Xiaoya had entered the dojo, the emperor smiled kindly and nodded. Although Bian Xiaoya, as the sect master of the divine court, was supposed to be on equal footing with them, that was only because of her identity and not because of her strength. But now, Bian Xiaoya was truly qualified to be on equal footing with them and call each other Daoist friends. For them, they were now wholeheartedly under Yi Shiwen's command. The stronger Yi Shiwen's subordinates were, the more Emperor Realm experts there were, and the more prosperous they were, the more beneficial it was for them. Moreover, in terms of the current territory of the human race, there was not much competition. The land of the 11 prefectures was large enough to accommodate these Emperor Realm experts. "Greetings, Master." Bian Xiaoya bowed respectfully. Yi Shiwen's face revealed a somewhat gratified smile. It was not only because Bian Xiaoya had entered the Emperor Realm. In his mind, many years ago, there was a woman who faced the boundless heavenly Tao, an independent and ambitious woman who wanted to become the first female empress in the world. Later, the news of her death broke people's hearts. But now, it seemed that he had somewhat fulfilled his ambition of that day. Even though he knew very well that things were still the same, but people were different, Bian Xiaoya was also not the beautiful woman in his memory. "Take a seat." Yi Shiwen waved his hand, and a cloud bed condensed behind the various emperor lords. Although Bian Xiaoya was his disciple, she was ranked at the bottom in terms of seniority and strength. So, she naturally sat at the bottom. However, the others would not look down on her because of this. Even if she sat at the end of the table, she was still the most eye-catching person present. It was not only because she was Yi Shiwen's disciple, but also because the time she took to attain the Tao was not inferior to Yi Shiwen back then, let alone the senior emperor lords like them. They could not be considered as existences in the same dimension. Among them, the most had cultivated for millions of years, and the shortest had cultivated for hundreds of thousands of years before they finally stepped into the sovereign emperor realm. On the other hand, Bian Xiaoya had only spent about 10,000 years to reach the sovereign emperor realm from an ordinary person. To these sovereign emperors, it was merely the time it took for them to cultivate in seclusion once, and Bian Xiaoya, who was a rising star, was already on equal footing with them, especially the human sovereign and Fengyi clan. They watched Bian Xiaoya cultivate all the way, and in such a short period of time, she broke through to her current level. They could not help but sigh in their hearts. She was indeed very impressive, but after thinking about it carefully, it was not a big deal. Because in addition to her, there was an even more monstrous existence. In less than 10,000 years, Yi Shiwen had stepped into the heavenly lord realm from the sovereign emperor realm back then, and became one of the few powerhouses in this vast and boundless land of the eastern region. He also brought the human clan to its current glorious status. Compared with Yi Shiwen, even a monstrous person seemed to be nothing. Thinking about it in this way, everything seemed normal. It was just a big monstrous person leading a small monstrous person. It was really very normal. After Bian Xiaoya returned and sat down, Yi Shiwen began to preach on his own, but this time he was talking about the Tao of consolidation. Naturally, it was to help Bian Xiaoya consolidate her own realm. Sure enough, Bian Xiaoya, who felt that her realm was unstable and might fall at any time just now, only listened to a few words from Yi Shiwen, and she felt enlightened all of a sudden. Her realm immediately consolidated, and there was no longer any danger of falling. This made the sovereign emperors admire her even more. Back then, they had spent a long time consolidating their realm, and those who were faster still spent 1,000 years. Now, just a few words from Yi Shiwen were equivalent to 1,000 years of bitter cultivation. After all, heavenly lords were completely different from sovereign emperors, so they could only think this way. However, they did not know that this was related to the 3,000 martial arts that Yishiwen cultivated. Even if he was not in the Heavenly Lord realm, it was still no problem for him to guide Bian Xiaoye, who had just made a breakthrough. Yishiwen preached. Halfway through, he suddenly stopped again. Immediately after, a smile appeared on his face, but he immediately restrained it. All the sovereign emperors were immersed in Yishiwen's preaching, and no one noticed anything strange about Yishiwen. However, Yishiwen's main body had already reached the crucial point of breaking through to the third realm. It had only been slightly more than 100 years since he returned from the path of creation, and it was already time for him to break through to the third realm. It was much faster than when he had broken through to the second realm. At this moment, in the deepest part of the divine court, under an incomparably huge tree, a young man in green was sitting cross-legged on a cloud bed. Around him, great Tao appeared and floated up and down in the form of runes. They flew here and there happily, and endless spiritual energy formed into dragon veins that danced around him. There were many fruits hanging on that huge tree. However, if one took a closer look, they would discover that every fruit was not an ordinary fruit, but a world. These worlds were still in the midst of chaos and had yet to take shape. Once they took shape, it would mean that Yishiwen's great Tao had been completed. This tree was none other than the Mingxin ancient tree, which Yishiwen had obtained in his early years. Later on, in Yishiwen's great undertaking, it had made countless contributions and saved him many times. Yishiwen's cultivation speed was so fast, and he had always been successful. In addition to the mysterious space, the Mingxin ancient tree had also played a very big role. The Mingxin ancient tree was a subspecies of the world tree, and it had the bloodline of the world tree. In his early years, with Yishiwen's strength, he was still unable to refine and restore it. However, since he had entered the sovereign emperor realm, he had been nourishing it day and night, consuming countless dragon veins, and had gradually transformed the Mingxin ancient tree into a world tree. It had only become a world tree, but it would still take countless years for it to form a world. It was said that the beginning of this endless world was an incomparably huge world tree standing in the midst of chaos. Originally, many worlds were hanging on the world tree. Later on, a shocking accident occurred, and the chaos opened up. These worlds flew into the chaos, and later formed the many worlds of today. Of course, there was still a huge gap between the world tree in Yishiwen's hands and the legendary world tree that had nurtured many worlds. It hadn't even nurtured a world, let alone nurtured thousands of worlds. If he could really reach that step, then he would truly be invincible in the myriad heavens and myriad worlds. However, it was still too early for that. Speaking of which, the Mingxin ancient tree had truly transformed into a world tree, but it still had to wait until he had entered the heavenly master realm. What made him even more surprised was that he had obtained the corpse of Emperor Primordial Chaos. Although the spirit wasn't there, and the mysteries had diminished a lot, the blood essence was still there. If he refined it with the Taotai decree, he could devour the origin within it, and it would be beneficial to him. But now, he realized that if he used the Taotai decree to store the essence and source energy, he would be able to form the world fruit on the world tree. If this continued to evolve, it would become a world. However, the conditions to form a world were simply too harsh. The amount of resources needed was even more unimaginable. It was unknown how many tens of thousands of years it would take to nurture a world. Of course, there were naturally many benefits. Once it was nurtured, all the principles would be formed during the formation of the world. Observing the formation of these principles would also be of great benefit to Yishiwen's cultivation. However, it would require a long period of accumulation. Now, the world tree fruit that Yishiwen had watered with the Heavenly Master's blood essence had already taken shape. The reason why he didn't choose to devour it directly was that if he swallowed the world tree fruit, not only would he obtain the endless power of the origin, but he would also obtain the principles that had yet to take shape. This would be enough to make Yi Shiwen's cultivation progress in a short period of time. This method was undoubtedly much more brilliant than the crude devouring method of Emperor Primordial Chaos. However, it could only be done with the World Tree in hand. In other words, only Yi Shiwen could do it in the entire world. This was also his unique advantage. However, the World Tree was extremely precious. The Emperor's blood essence wasn't of much use to him. Only the Heavenly Master's blood essence could nurture a matured World Tree fruit. Ordinary people could shed all their mortal bodies just by smelling this strange fragrance. They could become immortal even if they didn't practice martial arts. It was extremely miraculous. Yi Shiwen had also reached the most critical moment at this time. He hadn't lit the calamity-breaking incense. However, the power he had displayed when he had fought against the 4 great experts alone was already considered as a great tempering. His cultivation was naturally growing day by day. His comprehension of the realm had also reached a shocking level in the midst of life and death. Finally, he had achieved perfection and was about to make a breakthrough. He inhaled and exhaled endless spirit energy. Dragon veins shuttled back and forth between his mouth and nose. Countless principles were faintly discernible. Sometimes they were violent like a gale. Sometimes they were like a gentle breeze and a drizzle. However, countless principles were constantly flashing in front of his eyes. All kinds of mysteries fell into his eyes one by one. He couldn't rely on brute force to make a breakthrough when he had cultivated to this level. Comprehension was comprehension. The difference of a single line was like the difference between heaven and man. Chapter 34:11. It couldn't be forced or forced. When one's cultivation reached a certain level, it was like pushing a boat with the current. If there was, then there was. If there wasn't, then there wasn't. And now, Yi Shiwen had already reached the key point of a breakthrough. Countless laws were analyzed in front of him and used by him, increasing his accumulation bit by bit. The cultivation of a celestial master focused on accumulation. Yi Shiwen's cultivation progress by leaps and bounds was almost an anomaly. It couldn't be calculated by normal standards. Among emperors, his progress was already unimaginably fast, let alone among celestial masters. Fortunately, he had the help of the mysterious space. In addition, he was willing to use resources and wealth to make up for his lack of cultivation time, so he was able to make up for many of his shortcomings. However, this also meant that his accumulation wasn't very deep. Even if he had a harvest, it would be consumed completely in a short period of time. There was no other way around it. Fortunately, the 11 prefectures didn't simply require him to continue to invest. Instead, it had produced something. As time passed, the output would increase more and more, until one day, even if Yi Shiwen didn't have any fortuitous encounters, he would still be able to rely on the supplies from below to cultivate. This was also the greatest benefit of the competition between celestial masters. If not for this, celestial masters wouldn't be willing to fight to the death. But the cultivation of celestial masters consumed too many resources. If others had more, then they would have less. This was the root cause of the unrest in the world. The grievances between other races were just trivial matters. Between the Fortune God dynasty and the Outer Domain, between the Fortune God dynasty and the super sects and super clans, this was roughly the same. In addition, Yi Shiwen constantly opened his mouth and swallowed Xian pills one by one, and then continued to refine them. When he was still an emperor, each of these Xian creation pills took a long time to refine. But now, as long as he swallowed them, he could immediately and thoroughly refine them without any difficulty. This was also because after he entered the Celestial Master realm, the energy consumption was even more unimaginable for ordinary people. Even Xian creation pills needed to be swallowed in large quantities. Fortunately, he had a good harvest in the divine capital of fortune. Otherwise, he would have a headache now. Because the world tree fruit that he had watered with Celestial Master blood essence had not fully ripened, it still needed some time. Now, he could only scratch his head blindly. "Quick!" Yi Shiwen shouted. Around his body, many dragon veins began to burn. In front of his eyes, all the laws and rules suddenly manifested. The originally dark and obscure heavenly Tao suddenly became clear. He felt that it was time for the quantitative change to cause a qualitative change in his body. Countless information poured into his brain and was absorbed by him. The 3,000 martial arts were also quietly undergoing changes because he had practiced too many martial arts. If he had only practiced one type of martial arts, then it wouldn't have been so difficult. Perhaps he would have already broken through to the third realm. However, he didn't want to take such a simple path. He wanted to lay an incomparably solid foundation so that he wouldn't have any problems in the future. Soon, the time for Yi Shiwen's calculation had finally arrived. Little by little, he had finally reached the process of qualitative change. Boom! Yi Shiwen only felt a roar in his mind, and the somewhat obscure realm was broken in an instant. The third realm. I've finally entered the third realm. Ha 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 ha. Yi Shiwen laughed heartily. He was really in a good mood. He had put in so much effort to enter the third realm. Now, he had finally entered the third realm completely. Moreover, his realm was extremely stable, without the slightest instability. With his current strength, he could even be compared to the experts at the peak of the third realm. The depth of his martial arts was something that ordinary experts of the third realm couldn't even imagine. After entering the third realm, he could really be said to be truly free of worries. This was because the situation in the world was like this. Because of the heavenly gate tribulation, the celestial masters in the world had been swept down to the next realm. Many of them were only at the peak of the third realm, and some were not even at the third realm, only at the second realm. These people could be considered to have achieved the Tao relatively late. Because of this, there was the so-called space-time celestial master who had surpassed the heavenly gate tribulation. It was precisely because of this that the space-time celestial master had the possibility of being comparable to other powerful celestial masters. Otherwise, how could the four great celestial masters of the North, South, East, and West celestial masters be so easy to catch up and be comparable to them so easily? And now, Yi Shiwen, who had entered the third realm, could also be said to be qualified to be comparable to the four great celestial masters of the North, South, East, and West celestial masters. At the very least, it was enough to be comparable to space-time celestial master. In this world where strength was respected, Yi Shiwen was naturally a first-class figure among the celestial masters. Except for those celestial masters who had secretly broken through the heavenly gate long ago, he should be invincible. And the celestial masters who could break through the heavenly gate tribulation while it was still in existence could be counted on one hand. Otherwise, the celestial masters would not have been trapped by the heavenly gate tribulation. At this point, Yi Shiwen could be said to be standing on the same starting line as the majority of the celestial masters. He did not lose to them. As for the fact that many celestial masters would be able to break through the heavenly gate tribulation in a short period of time because of the existence of the good fortune key, he was already prepared for it. When this world tree fruit ripened, he would swallow it, and stepping into the peak of the third realm would only be a matter of time. With the help of the calamity-breaking incense, stepping into the fourth realm would also be just around the corner. It would not take a long time, and he would not be left behind. Yi Shiwen got up and looked at the towering world tree. There was a world tree fruit blooming with blazing divine light. It was watered by Yi Shiwen with the celestial master's blood essence. Although Emperor Primordial Chaos and the others had high realms, they had been trapped for many years after all. Their vitality was too weak, and they had only watered this world tree fruit together. However, all he lacked now was this world tree fruit. Once it matured, he would be able to reach the peak of the third realm within a short period of time and complete his transformation. When that time came, it would be time for him to kill Hierarch Skyfire. Now, he was confident that he would not be at a disadvantage against a heavenly master at the peak of the third realm. However, it was not enough to kill a veteran celestial master like Hierarch Skyfire. He would only be able to defeat him if he also stepped into the peak of the third realm. This was different from him and space-time heavenly master. Back then, Spacetime Heavenly Master guessed that he had killed Emperor God Rui, but it was not enough to fall out with him. However, Hierarch Skyfire had schemed repeatedly to harm him. This kind of person had to be killed as soon as possible. He could not allow him to break through the Heavenly Gate. Otherwise, he would be in huge trouble when the time came. As for the Fortune God Dynasty's blame, Huang Xiaolong didn't care at all. After he killed Hierarch Skyfire, what could the Fortune God Dynasty do to him? Moreover, he had just made a great contribution to the Fortune God Dynasty. He wouldn't burn the bridge after crossing the river. This was what he was really confident about. At that moment, Sword Master, who was preaching, suddenly opened his eyes and revealed an indescribable smile. He had finally stepped into the third realm. There were too many benefits. Now that his main body had stepped into the third realm, it was time for him to step into the second realm. With the accumulation of his main body, he only needed to push the boat along with the current to step into the second realm. It could be said to be extremely simple. This time's preaching will end here, Swordmaster said with a smile. Thank you, Your Excellency, Master, for dispelling our doubts. All the emperors said one after another. Xiaoya, stay for a while. Yi Shiwen said. Bien Xiaoya hurriedly stepped forward, and the others also tactfully left. Master, Bien Xiaoya's face revealed a little girlish expression. Perhaps only in front of Yi Shiwen, the Divine Court Sect Master, who was getting more and more powerful, would reveal such an expression. All right, you're already so old. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? Yi Shiwen's face revealed a smile. He didn't really mean to blame her. Now, in the Fortune Realm, he was really alone. Others were afraid of his power and identity. Who would dare to say anything witty to him? Perhaps only Bien Xiaoya, who he had watched grow up, would dare to do so. Bien Xiaoya stuck out her little tongue and said with some embarrassment, Master, why did you ask me to stay? First, I wanted to ask about your Emperor title. Now that you have finally stepped into the Emperor realm, you should also have an Emperor title. Spread it to spread your prestige. Yi Shiwen said. He didn't have an Emperor title for a long time, so others only called him Emperor Yi. Later, he used Wu as his title, and the saying of Martial Emperor gradually spread. Actually, I've thought about it a long time ago. I'll call myself Moon Empress from now on. Bien Xiaoya said with a smile. I asked. There shouldn't be a repeat. It's just that there was a Moon Empress at the beginning of the establishment of the Fortune Divine Dynasty, but she has already fallen. There shouldn't be any problem for me to use it now. Yi Shiwen nodded. As for whether it was inauspicious to use a dead person as a name, it wasn't within the scope of his consideration. After all, he was an emperor. He couldn't be affected by all kinds of bad luck. So, he couldn't do anything to an emperor, even if he was inauspicious. Well, since you already have a plan, then it's fine. Take this mysterious creation pill and consolidate your cultivation. It should be enough for you to quickly reach the peak of the first realm. Yi Shiwen flipped his palm, and a mysterious creation pill appeared on it. Because of his own experience, Yi Shiwen knew that the method of long-term cultivation to break through to the next realm was the right way, but he also disdained it. There was a shortcut to take, so there was no need to cling to this method and not let it go. Thank you, Master. Bien Xiaoya took the mysterious creation pill and said quickly, well, during this period of time, you should focus on closed-door cultivation. Leave the matters in the divine court to others. Refine the mysterious creation pill as soon as possible. Yi Shiwen instructed. Yes. Chapter 34:12. Yi Shiwen had stepped into the third realm, but it had been so quiet that no one knew about it. Even the entire human race didn't know that he had taken this crucial step. But he knew that since then, he could rest assured about many things. He didn't need to be as worried as before. But before he could take a breather and wait for the world tree fruit to ripen, he suddenly received an order from the Fortune Divine Capital, asking them to come in person. Yi Shiwen frowned slightly. This imperial edict had come quickly and urgently. Generally speaking, the heavenly venerables were stationed in all 8 directions. They would rarely issue a clear imperial edict to allow the heavenly venerables to enter the Fortune Divine Capital unless there was an urgent matter. Could there be some changes in the world? The Fortune Divine dynasty suppressed all directions. Who dared to defy them? But Yi Shiwen still didn't hesitate and went straight to the Fortune Divine capital. Sword Master was in closed-door cultivation, preparing to break through to the second realm. He had nothing to do now. With his cultivation, cultivating to the peak of the third realm was not something that could be achieved in a short time. He could only rely on the world tree fruit. During the period when the world tree fruit ripened, he basically had nothing to do. Soon, he arrived at the Fortune Divine capital. At this time, there were already many powerful existences gathered in the Fortune Divine capital. They did not dare to disobey the Fortune Divine capital's edict. It would have been fine if it was during normal times, but now that the Fortune Divine dynasty looked unprecedentedly powerful on the surface, no one was willing to go against it. Yi Shiwen immediately went to the War Divine capital. He wanted to figure out what the Fortune Divine dynasty was planning to do by summoning the Celestial Masters on such a large scale. Sure enough, the War Divine also guessed that Yi Shiwen would come to find him. He had been waiting for a long time. Daoist Wu Zun. The War Divine's eyes widened the moment he saw Yi Shiwen, as if he had seen something extraordinary, because he found that his perception of Yi Shiwen seemed to be a little blurred, and there was only one possibility that could make him feel like this, and that was Yi Shiwen had advanced a step further. Yi Shiwen naturally understood what he meant and nodded with a smile. The War Sovereign was slightly surprised, but he soon felt relieved. It seemed that ever since he knew him, he had always been this unexpected. His cultivation had always been like a rocket, advancing by leaps and bounds. Fellow Zhan Zun's cultivation has also made great progress. It seems that breaking through to the second realm is only a matter of time. Yi Shiwen also saw that Zhan Zun had not done nothing in the past hundreds of years. Relying on the deep foundation accumulated over the years, he had successfully pushed his cultivation to the peak of the first realm. It was only a matter of time before he broke through to the second realm. He was almost no less than Swordmaster. Not worth mentioning. Not worth mentioning. The Zhan Zun waved his hand and said. He thought that he had successfully cultivated to the peak of the first realm, which should have narrowed the gap between him and Yi Shiwen. However, it seemed that not only did he not close the gap, but he was even further apart. How could this not make him feel a little discouraged? His own progress seemed to be not worth mentioning in front of Yi Shiwen. Fellow Zhan Zun, as the saying goes, one doesn't come to the temple for no reason. I will get straight to the point. Why did the Fortune God dynasty summon us this time? Yi Shiwen asked. Let me explain to you. Suddenly, just as the Zhan Zun was about to speak, a hearty voice came in. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 30s, wearing a golden imperial robe, stride in. He had a handsome face and a small beard on his forehead, looking extremely dignified. Eastern Tianzuan. The Zhan Zun quickly got up and said, Eastern Tianzuan? Yi Shiwen was slightly surprised. He had naturally heard of the Eastern Tianzuan. In fact, he could also be regarded as in the Eastern Tianzuan's camp. However, since he entered the Fortune God dynasty, he had never really seen the Eastern Tianzuan. This was because the Eastern Tianzuan and the other great Tianzuan had always been in seclusion to refine the creation key. Except for the Southern Tianzuan and the Space-Time Tianzuan, Yi Shiwen had only heard of the other great Tianzuan. Yi Shiwen just glanced at him. Although he did not use his magic eyes, he still felt that the Eastern Tianzuan was unfathomable. He was not like the Zhan Zun, who could be easily seen through. In his heart, he could not help but have the most basic estimation. The strength of the Eastern Tianzuan was really unfathomable and tyrannical. No wonder he could oversee the Eastern region for so many years. He could suppress all the super sects and super clans in the Eastern region. He could also resist the invasion of foreign domains. His strength was unimaginable. Wu Zun, I have heard about you from the Zhan Zun many times. However, I did not have the opportunity to meet you. Now that I have such a rare opportunity, you really live up to your reputation. The Eastern Tianzuan sat on the cloud bed and said in a heroic manner, Eastern Tianzuan is overpraising me. The Eastern Tianzuan is extraordinary. Hearing about you is not as good as meeting you in person. Yishuan smiled slightly and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. The Eastern Tianzuan nodded with a smile and said, "Didn't you just ask why I summoned all of you? Now, I can answer you." "Eastern Tianzuan, please speak," Yishuan said. The Eastern Tianzuan's face revealed a somewhat dignified smile and said, "You know a little about the history of the Fortune Divine Dynasty. It is roughly divided into the Savage period before the establishment of the Fortune Divine Dynasty and the period after the establishment of the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Am I right?" Yes. Although Yishuan was a little puzzled in his heart, he still had a rough understanding of the history of the Fortune Divine Dynasty. However, what was it like before the Savage period? This is something that practically doesn't exist in the published records. The Eastern Celestial Venerate said, "Before the Savage period, wasn't it the chaotic era at the beginning of the creation of the world?" Yishuan could not help but ask in a puzzled manner. Yes, it was the chaotic era. In that era, all kinds of powerful existences ran amok. The existences that could walk freely in the chaos were almost innumerable. At that time, the world tree still existed, and the world had not yet evolved into what it is today, said the Eastern Tianzuan. However, this is just the beginning of our era, prehistoric civilization. These words instantly emerged in Yishuan's mind. Yes, it is the prehistoric civilization. It should be said that it is the civilization of the previous era. According to our information, the universe has begun and then been destroyed. This is not something that has happened once or twice, said the Eastern Tianzuan. The so-called living as long as heaven and earth, shining as bright as the sun and moon, and immortality is probably like this. However, even heaven and earth have a time when their lifespan ends and they enter the reincarnation cycle, let alone humans. The previous era. In Yishuan's mind, it was as if a bolt of lightning had cut through the chaos. It was like the first lightning in the world, bringing light and life. Many of his previous conjectures, as well as many of the things that didn't make sense, were now explained. Reincarnation existed in the world, and each reincarnation cycle was like a day and a night for the world, even though the days and nights were extremely long. He had previously discovered many laws on the path of creation that were completely different from the current law system, and he also had a reasonable explanation for them. No wonder there were so many laws that were obviously the same, but the operating mode and the way they existed were completely different. It turned out that the laws belonged to a different era. It was the system before the world entered the reincarnation cycle after the great destruction of the world. Naturally, it was completely different from the present. This time, the Fortune God dynasty has summoned us. Is it related to the events of the previous era? Asked Yishuan. Yes, many people don't know about the reincarnation of the world in the previous era. However, in fact, the civilization of the previous era still exists. It is just that the endless universe of the heavens beyond is blocked by the laws of our world. However, there is not a moment that they don't want to return to the Fortune God dynasty and regain the dominance of this world. Such a struggle has been going on since billions of years ago. The Eastern Venerate said, "This kind of struggle has never stopped. It's just that we're the main characters of this era, and the heavenly Tao favors us. That's why they haven't succeeded. Even so, we have spent a lot of energy to resist and suppress them. If that wasn't the case, based on our Fortune God dynasty's strength, why would we need to fight to a draw with the foreign domains and tolerate them in every possible way? The real reason is that most of our experiences are involved in the chaos of the 33 heavens." The Celestial Venerate continued. Actually, you don't know this, but many creatures from the outer realm actually belong to the last epoch, or even the epoch before that. Because the mystical powers they cultivate are incompatible with the current nomological laws, they're unable to obtain the support of the nomological laws or the favor of the heavenly Tao. Even the Emperor Lords can only live for tens of millions of years. The Tao severing that they speak of is actually cutting away the traces of the past epoch. allowing one's body and mind to fully integrate into the current epoch. Only then can they obtain the support of the nomological laws and the favor of the heavenly Tao. Thus, they can live as long as the heavens and the earth, and shine as brightly as the sun and the moon. At the beginning of this era, many foreign world creatures with the bloodline of the ancient era ran rampant. The creatures born in this era trembled in front of the creatures from the past era. It was not until the fortune heavenly monarch, a peerless genius, appeared out of nowhere, swept through the world, and established the fortune divine dynasty that we, the creatures born in this era, had cleared a place for us to live. Yi Shiwen's expression was calm, but his heart was in an uproar. So this is the truth of all history. The so-called dispute between the fortune god dynasty and the foreign creatures turned out to be the root cause. It even involved the existence of the creatures of the previous era. Chapter 34:13. This was the truth buried deep in history. Moreover, there were many bloodlines of creatures from previous eras among the foreign worlds. In fact, rather than saying that the battle between the Fortune Divine Dynasty and the foreign worlds was an internal struggle of the Fortune world, it was more accurate to say that it was a battle between the current era's creatures and the previous era's creatures, or even the era before that. However, another thought popped up in Yi Shiwen's mind. He said, however, if there is reincarnation in the world and life and death, I'm afraid all living creatures would have been completely destroyed by the Great Apocalypse. How could there be creatures of an era surviving? Well, that's the normal situation. Yes, that's the normal situation. According to our intelligence, when a world is destroyed, ordinary life forms will not be able to survive. Everything will return to primal chaos. Even emperor lords will suffer heavy casualties, and empyreans will only be able to escape with their lives. There are even some who might perish. However, this isn't necessarily the case. No one is willing to accept death willingly. Everyone will think of a way to prepare a pure land before the world is destroyed and hide in it. Of course, this place won't be too big, said the Eastern Empyrean. I see. Yi Shiwen suddenly understood. If they knew about the Great Apocalypse, perhaps no one would be willing to be captured without a fight. If it were him, he would also have to react. This was especially true for these high and mighty heavenly venerates. In fact, this was not easy. Surviving in the Great Apocalypse was not the most difficult thing. With his heavenly venerate's strength and physical strength, the collapse of a world might pose a threat to him, but it would not be a fatal threat. As long as he dealt with it carefully, he could survive. However, the real problem lay in the future. The fundamental reason why the creatures of any era could be invincible was because they could adapt to the laws of that era. If the heavenly Tao of this era collapsed and the world entered chaos, or even reopened, the laws of the world would also become different. Those laws looked similar, but in fact they were completely different cores. It was just that the forms they appeared to be similar. Therefore, there were actually many law crystals on the path of creation. However, most of them were useless. Only a small number of them contained the laws of the era. These remnants of the previous era are constantly thinking of invading us and taking back their control of the world. Over the years, most of us have been fighting outside. Eastern Empyreans said, could it be that there's a problem with the defensive line, suppressing them? Yi Shiwen immediately asked. His mind flashed like lightning, and he immediately thought of the possible problems that could arise. Yes, in recent years, their attacks have become more and more intense. Therefore, after we made the decision, we chose to refine the creation key and rescue those heavenly venerables trapped on the path of creation. There was no expression on his face, and it was impossible to tell whether he supported or opposed this matter. After all, this matter would more or less deprive them of their authority. But because of this, the strength of the outer domain has also greatly increased. Could it be? Yi Shiwen mentioned another possibility. If it was originally a war between the outer domain and the Fortune God dynasty, then it had now become a war between eras. Eastern Empyrean naturally understood Yi Shiwen's words. He shook his head and said, You can rest assured about this. Although the outer domain is considered to be the bloodline left behind by the previous era, they are not united with them. Although there may be pawns left behind by them, there is no need to worry about the overall situation. Moreover, we are not to be trifled with. If they want to cause trouble, they have to see if they have the ability to do so. In this regard, Eastern Empyrean was full of confidence. It was as if he did not care about this problem at all. That's good. Yi Shiwen nodded. Now, he was also one with the Fortune God dynasty. If the Fortune God dynasty was overthrown and the creatures of the previous era took over, it would also be a disaster for him. Does the Fortune God dynasty want us to go to the front line to suppress them this time? Yi Shiwen asked. That is the intention, but it is not necessary to say that it is a group. However, I have called everyone in my camp. As for the others, it is their business to call a few. Eastern Empyrean said, but I think they will not be lenient. There will be a war soon, and the result of the war will directly determine the ownership of the Middle Heavenly Master. Middle Heavenly Master. Yi Shiwen's eyes suddenly lit up. A Middle Heavenly Venerable was equivalent to the Lord of the Fortune God dynasty. Once a Middle Heavenly Venerable was confirmed to be a Middle Heavenly Venerable, he would be in existence above the other Heavenly Venerables. This is also the method that we discussed together. Otherwise, do you really want us to go all out and fight? Eastern Empyrean said with a slight smile. So I hope that you can help me. If I succeed in becoming a Middle Heavenly Master, I will fully recommend you to take over the position of Eastern Empyrean. In other words, the Eastern Territory is a vast place for you to run. Yi Shiwen's spirits were lifted when he heard this. Among the many Heavenly Venerables, only the Southern, Western, and Southern Heavenly Venerables were comparable to the Eastern Heavenly Venerables. Among the many Heavenly Venerables of the Fortune God dynasty, the Eastern Heavenly Venerables were also high and mighty existences. Once Yi Shiwen successfully ascended to the top, he would be considered as the #1 person in the Eastern region. However, he rarely thought about it, because whether it was qualifications or strength, he was too far behind. It could even be said that he could not convince the masses. Each of the East, West, and North Heavenly Masters had experienced many battles and made great contributions. At the same time, they were also outstanding in strength. Yi Shiwen's conditions in all aspects were much worse. There were naturally many benefits to being a Middle Heavenly Master, but at the same time, the difficulty was unquestionable. Only with the full support of Eastern Empyrean could he possibly have such an opportunity. If you want to become a Heavenly Master of the East, West, and North Heavenly Master, it is not enough for me to just give up my position. In addition to possessing formidable strength, the most important thing is to make great contributions to the Fortune God dynasty. Otherwise, how can the masses be convinced? I have stood against the majority's opinion and allowed you to go to the path of good fortune because I intend to groom you. However, that alone is not enough. Although you have made a lot of contributions before, that was when you were an emperor. It is completely different from being a Heavenly Master. You must understand. Eastern Empyrean finally got to the point. He intended to groom Yi Shiwen as a successor. Although Yi Shiwen wasn't the best candidate, and he wasn't the most senior in his camp, but he also had his own considerations. Yi Shiwen suddenly understood. So that was the case. No wonder such a cushy job like the path of good fortune had found him. It turned out that Eastern Empyrean had already intended to groom him. However, he also had doubts in his heart. He had only joined Eastern Empyrean's camp not long ago. Why did Eastern Empyrean think so highly of him? Although War Elder Strength had not yet entered the second realm, and certainly could not convince the masses, Yi Shiwen did not believe that Eastern Empyrean did not have other supporters. If one wanted to become a Middle Heavenly Master, outstanding strength alone was not enough. One also had to have enough supporters. Understand? Yi Shiwen nodded. However, if I want to take over the Eastern Empyrean position, I'm afraid it will not be easy. Yes, there are still many people waiting to take over the position. In terms of qualifications, you are indeed not qualified. In terms of strength, you're just barely qualified. Therefore, this trip to the front line of the epic battlefield is crucial for both you and me. As long as you succeed, the position of middle heavenly master will be within your grasp. If you want to take over the Eastern Empyrean position, the difficulty will be much lower, said Eastern Empyrean. Many thoughts flashed through Yi Xuan's mind. He also understood Eastern Empyrean's thoughts. If he could successfully become a middle heavenly master and Yi Xuan could become an Eastern Empyrean, then he could occupy 2 seats among the East, South, West, and Central heavenly masters. In the future, his right to speak in the Fortune God dynasty would also greatly increase, and he would be able to suppress everyone. In the end, it was a matter of mutual benefit. However, there's one more thing I have to tell you. You'll have to face many opponents. Just in my camp alone, there's another candidate. Originally, he was the only one, but your recent performance has been particularly outstanding, so I've included you as well. I don't care how you compete. I only care about the final result. Eastern Empyrean mentioned to Yi Xuan that he still had another candidate. And Yi Xuan was not surprised. There were many heavenly masters in the world. However, how many of them could occupy the East, South, West, and West heavenly masters? Under such circumstances, the challenges that he had to face could be imagined. It was not easy to obtain. However, he was not discouraged. The more it was like this, the more it proved that the position of Eastern Empyrean had great benefits. Moreover, after becoming an Eastern Empyrean, he could use the Fortune God dynasty's destiny to act. He would not easily encounter setbacks. His cultivation would also be smooth, and there would be great benefits. Of course, if he really succeeded, he would also have to bear a lot of responsibility. However, it was not worth mentioning. Well, I have already told you about these things. I still have things to deal with. I will see you at the Heavenly Masters Convention. Eastern Empyrean finished speaking, and his entire body instantly disappeared in front of the two. Congratulations, Taoist Wuzun, War Venerable said with a smile on his face. I haven't succeeded yet. It is still too early to congratulate me. Yi Xuan waved his hand and said, Come and congratulate me after I succeed. Yi Xuan wasn't too happy because he knew that with the support of the Eastern Heavenly Venerable, he only had the qualification and entrance ticket to participate in this competition. However, it was impossible for him to obtain a big advantage. The other contenders would likely not be simple either. Just as the Eastern Heavenly Venerate had said, their performance in the next epic battlefield would be the most important. Chapter 34:14. Yi Xuan paused and said, Fellow Taoist War Elder, you will also go to the era battlefield this time, right? Yes, after the matters of the Fortune God dynasty are settled, I will also go with you. War Elder nodded and said, This is a good opportunity to make a contribution. Killing a few heavenly masters from the previous era will not only allow you to obtain a huge amount of wealth, but you will also make a great contribution to the Fortune God dynasty and receive many benefits from the imperial court. At that time, stepping into the second realm will only be a matter of time. He glanced at Yi Xuan. In fact, it was because of Yi Xuan's provocation that he made such a decision. He had been a war emperor for too long, so long that he had lost his edge. Now, he wanted to regain his former glory. His cultivation could progress only by relying on bitter cultivation. However, it would be very slow. Only by constantly going through slaughters and constantly obtaining fortuitous encounters could his cultivation advance by leaps and bounds like Yi Xuan's. But I also want to ask, how much do you know about this era battlefield? Yi Xuan asked. Zhan Zun paused for a moment and said, Actually, I've only heard a little about this era battlefield, and I don't know much about it. I only know that the Fortune Divine Dynasty has deployed a great deal of manpower and resources to the era battlefield for the sake of guarding against the surprise attacks of the creatures from previous eras. Because according to our knowledge, there have been successful precedents since ancient times. There are successful precedents? Yi Xuan's eyes widened. Although he didn't know what the ancient era was like, he could roughly imagine how powerful the ancient era was just by thinking about the Fortune God dynasty. However, it was still successfully counterattacked by someone. In fact, it was the turtle dove that occupied the magpie's nest. This was an absolutely incredible miracle. The creatures born in the new era were born in accordance with the heavenly way law. It could be said that they took advantage of the right time, the right place, and the right people. All kinds of geniuses came forth in large numbers, and the experts were as numerous as the carps in the river. Those who experienced the great destruction of the world were inevitably seriously injured. Only a few of them could escape. Even so, they were still counterattacked. Even Yishuin didn't know what to say. Yes, there are successful precedents. When I looked up the information and saw the records, I also felt that it was incredible. But there are indeed such existences who successfully counterattacked and then seized the financial resources of one or even two eras for their own use. In the era battlefield, they're the most terrifying existences. The war ancestor nodded. However, these epics won't easily make a move. Once they do, it will be a thunderous blow. Our true opponents now are the epics from the previous epoch, or even the epoch before that. Although some of them survived the Great Shattering and are hiding in the final fragments of the world, they are still fragments after all. The longer we delay, the fewer experts they produce. Even the peak heavenly venerates don't have enough resources to cultivate. Hence, they're the ones who crazily want to break through the defensive line of our epic battlefield. If they don't do this, they won't be able to survive the next great destruction. Every time the great destruction of the world occurs, even the world fragments deep in the endless primal chaos will suffer unspeakable disasters. Every time the great destruction of the world occurs, they will be seriously injured. Yishuin finally realized how bad the situation the Fortune God dynasty was facing now was. How many ancient eras were waiting for a counterattack? The Fortune God dynasty wanted to contend with the outstanding talents of the past. No wonder there weren't enough experts produced wave after wave. The opponents they faced were too strong. Some eras are already at the point where they can't hold on any longer. This is also the time when they are the craziest. Therefore, the pressure on the era battlefield increases greatly. This is also the fundamental reason why the Eastern Heavenly Venerate and the others want to rescue the experts trapped in the path of creation. War Elder said, but this is also a good time for us to make contributions. Once we can make great contributions, our future will be limitless. Especially you, the Eastern Heavenly Venerate thinks so highly of you. In the future, it is also very possible for you to become the Eastern Heavenly Venerate. Yishuin smiled slightly. He knew that everything wasn't that simple, but it didn't stop him from working hard in this direction. Yishuin left after asking War Elder some more about the era battlefield. War Elder really had a good understanding of the era battlefield. Before leaving, he had done his homework. After Yishuin returned to the place where he was staying in God's capital, the Fortune God dynasty quickly sent him a lot of information about the era battlefield. Because of the many years of fighting, there was a lot of information. But with Yishuin's eyes, he naturally finished reading it quickly. He also had a deep understanding of the era battlefield. There were many active eras in the era battlefield, but generally speaking, they were divided into two groups. The first group was naturally the current era's camp, represented by the Fortune God dynasty. The other group was the ancient era's camp. Basically, the ancient era's camp was in this group. The Fortune God dynasty was a fat piece of meat in their eyes. However, the ancient era's camp wasn't monolithic. There were also many grudges between them. These ancient era's camp had been like the Fortune God dynasty. At that time, they had also faced attacks from other ancient eras, and some even joined forces to besiege them. There was also a blood feud between them. It was impossible for them to cooperate intimately. At this time, the reason why they cooperated with each other was mainly to capture the Fortune God realm and the many worlds under the Fortune God realm. They wanted to plunder enough resources to last until the next great apocalypse. This process was endless until they couldn't hold on anymore and perished. The destruction and replacement of an era was also a heavy topic for the Heavenly Masters. For those below the Emperor realm, it was a situation of certain death. They could only survive if they could obtain the protection of a Heavenly Master. But for Yishuin, it was still too far away. He had only cultivated for tens of thousands of years. Compared to the many heavenly masters, he was still a junior. And this time, going to the Era battlefield was indeed the best opportunity for him to reach the peak. But everything could only be determined after the Heavenly Masters Conference. After waiting for another day, the Heavenly Masters Conference finally began. It was held in a spatial plane in the depths of the Fortune Heavenly Palace. Yi Shiwen and Zhan Zun, who had been notified, went together. Under Zhan Zun's guidance, they entered this space. There was nothing else in this space. There were only throne after throne, towering into the clouds. Each throne was made of white jade. It looked exquisite and imposing. Each throne was engraved with the name of a heavenly master. This was the venue for the Heavenly Masters Conference of the Fortune God Dynasty. Many of the participating heavenly venerates had already arrived, but not everyone was seated. Many of them were still reminiscing about the past. These heavenly venerates had been in seclusion all year round for countless years, so it was rare for them to meet each other. Some of them were even separated by different great domains. Although distance didn't mean much to them, unless they deliberately paid a visit, the probability of them meeting each other was almost non-existent. Therefore, they naturally wouldn't let go of such a rare opportunity easily. Yi Shiwen and Zhan Zun had just arrived at the Heavenly Masters Conference when a handsome young man with silver, shoulder-length hair strode over. This young man was dressed in a luxurious robe. He was tall and slender, and there was a bright moon hanging on his forehead. It wasn't a crescent-shaped mark, but a real bright moon. There was a world on his forehead. Although Yi Shiwen hadn't seen him before, it wasn't difficult to guess the identity of this person from the information he had obtained. The patriarch of the Silver Moon clan, Heavenly Master Silver Moon. Previously, there were only a few forces in the entire eastern region that were comparable to them. Although Yi Shiwen hadn't seen the other Heavenly Masters, he could still recognize their portraits and features. Greetings, fellow Taoist Wu Zun. Heavenly Master Silver Moon stepped forward and bowed. Yi Shiwen also bowed. The Silver Moon clan was the only super clan in the eastern region that was ranked among the top 10 strongest clans before the rise of the human race. It couldn't be said that there was no confrontation and competition between the two clans. However, in general, it wasn't to the extent of completely falling out. No matter how small the eastern region was, it wasn't to the extent that it couldn't accommodate them. I saw fellow Taoist Wu Zun just now. I thought I was mistaken, but now it seems that I was right. Ha ha ha. Heavenly Master Silver Moon laughed heartily. His laughter was very heroic, but it didn't match his elegant appearance. However, at this time, the two of them had long passed the time to distinguish good from bad by appearance. I've heard about fellow Taoist Wu Zun for a long time. Now that I see it, it seems that hearing about you isn't as good as meeting you in person. Heavenly Master Silver Moon said with a smile, "You're indeed a dragon among men." Heavenly Master Silver Moon wasn't flattering him, but it came from the bottom of his heart. Yi Shiwen had single-handedly brought the human race to its current position. He didn't feel anything because he had also single-handedly brought the Silver Moon clan to the position of the top 10 strongest clans. However, what really surprised him was how much time Yi Shiwen had spent in total. It had been less than 20,000 years, while the time he had spent was 10 times or even 100 times that of Yi Shiwen. This time, it was clear who was superior. "You flatter me, fellow Taoist Silver Moon." Yi Shiwen waved his hand and said, "I haven't visited you before. Please don't take it to heart. This is nothing. We will be neighbors in the future, so we should visit each other more often in the future." Heavenly Master Silver Moon said with a smile. Eastern Venerable also told you before that he would do his best to help him ascend to the position of Middle Venerable. Yi Shiwen's eyes flashed when he heard this. He said, "So, you are the other person that Eastern Venerable mentioned?" Chapter 34:15. Indeed, Heavenly Venerate Silver Moon smiled faintly. If Eastern Venerate wants to go one step further and become a Middle Heavenly Venerate, how is it possible to rely on his own strength? Although we stand on his side, it is only a mutually beneficial relationship. Heavenly Master Silver Moon's words had revealed the secrets of the heavens. Whether it was Eastern Heavenly Master Silver Moon, or Yi Shiwen, they were all Heavenly Master level experts. Such people were incomparably proud. How could they yield to others so easily? Even an outstanding talent like Easter Venerate was no exception. It was impossible to convince them. If Yi Shiwen had joined Eastern Venerate's camp when he was still an emperor, he would still be a subordinate. However, after he had truly entered the Heavenly Venerate realm, they had already become allies. Partners. Everyone in this camp was an alliance. There was only one goal, and that was to push the Eastern Sky Venerate up and become a mid-level Heavenly Venerate. The Eastern Sky Venerate would naturally reap great benefits, but he would also have to face great risks. He would have to fend off the storm of other forces. They could also reap a lot of benefits from this. Among them, the position of Eastern Venerate was one of the benefits. As long as Eastern Venerate became a middle Venerate, then his position would be handed over. Of course, the premise was that he could smoothly become a middle Venerate. Yi Shiwen finally understood why Eastern Venerate's rule in the Eastern region was as stable as Mount Tai. It turned out that he had already roped in a local tyrant like the Silver Moon clan. Naturally, he had nothing to fear. I'm not that old guy from Heavenly Tao. I'm not that ambitious, hee. Silver Moon laughed mischievously. Yi Shiwen could understand what he meant. Compared to the human race and the Silver Moon clan, a colossus like the Heavenly Tao cult, other than seizing land and resources, they also needed to spread their great Tao. This was the biggest conflict between the Heavenly Tao cult and the Fortune God dynasty. Therefore, these super sects had always been the number one target of suppression by the Fortune God dynasty. Compared to strong clans like the human race and the Silver Moon clan, they were even more vigilant. I won't hide it from you. I also have my own thoughts about the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. However, the competition between us can be considered a healthy one. Most importantly, we can't let outsiders have a chance. Heavenly Venerate Silver Moon said very seriously. Yi Shiwen immediately understood Celestial Master Silver Moon's meaning. If either of them obtained this position, then it would be considered as a piece of meat in the pot. However, on the other hand, it would inevitably bring about a new round of turmoil if an outsider were to encroach on this position. At this time, most of the benefits and territories of the Eastern region had already been divided. So, another powerful Eastern Celestial Master would inevitably bring about a new round of turmoil and reshuffling. This was also a situation that Celestial Master Silver Moon, who had a vested interest in the Eastern region, didn't wish to see. Of course, the premise is that Eastern Venerate succeeds. Before that, I think we should work together. Silver Moon said. Once Eastern Venerate was promoted, even if he could not seize the position, he would still gain a lot of benefits. This was the so-called merit of following the dragon. Of course, he was still very confident. In his opinion, no matter what, Yi Shiwen was a rising star. However, he was only a rising star. He was too young, even if he was compared with the space-time Heavenly Lord who was also a rising star. It was scary to be young at such an age. It was both an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. I don't know if you know who else Easter Venerate brought to the epic battlefield this time, besides you and me? Yi Shiwen asked directly. These things were not taboo. Anyway, he would find out sooner or later, so it was not a big deal. Besides you, me, and the Warlord, there's another person that even I don't know the name of. Everyone calls him Mr. Huang. He's a Celestial Venerate, but his origins are very mysterious. It's said that he was saved by the Eastern Celestial Venerate, and he's been serving the Eastern Celestial Venerate all this time. Celestial Venerate Silver Moon explained everything she knew. Yi Shiwen nodded in understanding. This should be all of Eastern Venerate's subordinates. As for the Heavenly Sect leader, he should not be included in this scope. In addition, there were 3 other Heavenly Masters. These were the ancient Heavenly Masters who were brought back by Yi Shiwen and War Master. They had been trapped in the path of creation for many years. In terms of qualifications, they were probably more senior than Eastern Venerate. They should not have been roped in by Eastern Venerate yet. Perhaps they had the ambition to be independent like the heavenly sect leader. However, they were still recovering at this time. It was estimated that they would not be able to catch up for a while. In this way, it could be said that the masters of the Eastern region had come out in full force. Eastern Venerate must be planning to go all out. However, thinking about it, if he did not do so, how could he have made great contributions and become a middle heavenly master in one fell swoop? Spacetime Heavenly Master had been in charge of the Central region for many years. He had pacified countless rebellions. He had made great contributions to the Fortune God dynasty, but he was still not enough to become a middle heavenly master. This showed the difficulty of becoming a middle heavenly master. All the heavenly masters had considered it. If they could not achieve it, then they could not. If they wanted to become a middle heavenly master, they must have an overwhelming advantage. Only then could they make others speechless. Now, the four heavenly masters of the Eastern, Southern, Western, and Spacetime heavenly masters were rubbing their palms, ready to go all out. There were many people like the Eastern Celestial Venerate who promised to give up their positions once they became Middle Celestial Venerates. Whether it was for the collective interests of the camp or for their own interests, an intense competition was inevitable. Eastern Venerate himself was already unfathomable. If he roped in these masters, he would indeed have the possibility of coming out on top in the Middle Heavenly Master selection. Soon, Yishuan saw another top master in the Eastern region. He was the Heavenly Sect's Supreme Master. He was an old man wearing a gray robe. After noticing Yishuan's gaze, he just glanced at Yishuan expressionlessly and then turned his head again. Yishuan had a grudge with Heavenly Sect in the early years. Later, it became more and more intense. If it were not for the mediation of Eastern Venerate Palace, the grudge between the two sides would have pierced through the sky. Although that page had been turned over, now that he thought about it, he was afraid that Heavenly Sect was not so willing. In addition, the camps of both sides were obviously different. Heavenly Sect was the leader of the world's major sections. They were regarded as the leader of the civilian forces. On the other hand, the human race was obviously closer to the Fortune God dynasty. Their camps were completely different. However, Yishuan did not care. If it were in the past, he would still be worried about Heavenly Sect's revenge. Now, he had no such worries, because if they really fought, it was uncertain who would retaliate. Chapter 34:16. In the distance, a figure walked over. His entire body was fiery red, like a ball of flame. His entire body was radiating brilliance. He had a kind of majestic and domineering aura. Yishuan raised his eyebrows slightly and said softly, "Divine Skyfire." It had been many years since Yishuan last saw Divine Fire Venerable Yishuan. However, he would never forget it. However, Yishuan only glanced at it for a moment and immediately saw that this Tianhua divinity was actually just a wisp of his soul avatar. Many people present had come with their avatars because they were either in close cultivation or somewhere else. They could not come in person. At this time, they had to come with their spirit avatars. There was not much difference between having a spirit avatar come and having a spirit avatar come. Yishuan originally had the intention to kill, but he eventually suppressed it. There was no use in killing a mere avatar. Unless he could kill Divine Skyfire's true body, that would be more like it. I didn't expect you to become so strong. Hierarch Skyfire looked at Yishuan with a surprised look on his face. He had never expected that Yishuan would become so powerful. He was so amazing. Of course, he was just a wisp of spirit incarnation. He couldn't see Yishuan's depth. However, he knew that Yishuan didn't look like someone who had just entered the Heavenly Master realm. In fact, Yishuan's realm had already stabilized. He had never thought that Yishuan could go further. Yishuan had only achieved Tao for 10,000 years. It was already very impressive that he could completely consolidate his cultivation. While he was in closed-door training, he had only heard about Yishuan killing Emperor Hunyuan and the others. In his opinion, Yishuan was just taking advantage of the situation. How much of a threat could a dying heavenly master who was about to be trapped to death be? It seems that I've disappointed you, Yishuin said faintly. Divine Skyfire was arrogant and had a momentum that could swallow mountains and rivers. However, he was not bad either. He killed decisively all the way and never stopped. He had a state of mind that was not inferior to anyone. It's not disappointing. The result is the same. Hierarch Skyfire revealed a faint smile that contained a hint of ridicule. Don't think that just because you've stepped into the Empyrean realm that you can stand on equal footing with me. I'm not Empyrean Lord Primordius. Killing you is as easy as blowing off a puff of smoke. Next time, you will understand the disparity between a veteran Empyrean and a newly ascended Empyrean like you. Divine Venerable Skyfire's words were overflowing with killing intent. However, he was disappointed that Yishuin's expression didn't change at all. In fact, there wasn't even the slightest fluctuation. He thought that his murderous words would move Yishuin. The murderous intent of a veteran Celestial Master, even a newly ascended Celestial Master, could not be underestimated. In fact, it would even make one tremble in fear. This was especially true for a veteran Empyrean like him. Although the difference in their cultivation realms wasn't that great, the truth was that the difference in their foundation was too great. If he stepped into the fourth realm, then the gap between the two sides would be even greater. It was definitely not a pleasant thing to be targeted by such an old fellow. However, Yishuin didn't. He didn't know what Yishuin was thinking. For Yishuin, if he could swallow the fruit of the world tree and step into the peak of the third realm before Hierarch Skyfire broke through, he would dare to kill his way into the southern region and uproot his divine fire sect. Finally, Yishuin revealed a mocking expression. Hierarch Skyfire was too confident. Or perhaps it could be said that people like him had been arrogant for too long. He only thought about coming out of his cultivation to kill Yishuin. He might even have considered how to deal with the uproar in the world. A Empyrean from the southern region killing people in the eastern region would definitely cause an uproar in the world. However, he had never thought about whether Yishuin had the ability to protect himself, or whether Yishuin could kill him first and uproot his forces. He was too proud, so proud that he didn't want to think about these things. Yishuin's sneer fell in a Hierarch Skyfire's eyes. He felt that it was very irritating. He couldn't say why. In his original opinion, even if Yishuin didn't show an expression of fear and trepidation, he should be shocked and angry. Empyreans were unfathomable. That was because ordinary people and ordinary matters were not enough to move them, and Hierarch Skyfire was qualified to do so. In the end, Hierarch Skyfire coldly turned and left. He was just a wisp of spirit. If he continued to challenge Yishuin, who was an Empyrean, it would only be a matter of minutes before he was crushed to death. No one would punish Yishuin because of this. It was just a wisp of spirit. It was not a big deal. It was like stepping on an ant on the side of the road. Others respected him and feared him only because of the main body behind him. If others were not afraid of his main body, then what was he? After a while, the war elder came forward and said, "You quarreled with him again?" "Quarreled? What's there to quarrel about?" Yishuin laughed. His smile was a bit more terrifying. The war elder immediately understood Yishuin's words. Yes, what's there to quarrel about? If you can fight, then don't talk. He had heard Yishuin talk about the grievances between him and Hierarch Skyfire before. The two sides were probably already irreconcilable. At this point, it was meaningless to say anything else. However, he was still very clear about Hierarch Skyfire's strength. However, once he had such a thought, with the firm will of a heavenly venerate, he was afraid that a life and death battle would really occur. "Is there no room for reconciliation between the two of you?" asked the Eastern heavenly venerate quickly. He was very clear about the strength of Hierarch Skyfire. He was a veteran powerhouse among the veteran powerhouses. Although his strength realm had plummeted because of the heavenly gay tribulation, he was not someone that a rising star like Yishuin could compare with. Now, the one who would really suffer a loss would be Yishuin. Yishuin was now also an important member of his camp. He naturally did not want Yishuin to fall here. If that happened, it would be a great obstacle to his great plan to ascend to the middle heavenly venerate. There is no room for reconciliation. When he comes out, he will also come to kill me. Now, it is just a matter of who makes the first move, said Yishuin faintly. He could clearly see that Hierarch Skyfire would never let him go. However, Hierarch Skyfire did not know that Yishuin's determination was not inferior to Hierarch Skyfire's. In that case, make your move. The only troublesome one is Heavenly Venerate South. However, I can help you to hold Heavenly Venerate South in secret. You have to end the battle quickly. If you can't do it, don't force yourself, reminded the Eastern Heavenly Venerate. However, as the price for my help, you will not receive the reward for rescuing everyone on the path of creation. Understood. Yishuin naturally agreed. Previously, he had been most worried about Heavenly Venerate South. Although he had a personal grudge with Hierarch Skyfire, he was still behaving atrociously in the southern region's territory. Now that the Eastern Heavenly Venerate had helped to hold Heavenly Venerate South, his original worries had vanished. As for the reward that the Eastern Heavenly Venerate had mentioned, he didn't really care about it. Compared to killing Hierarch Skyfire, it was nothing. Not to mention that he had already obtained a lot. The reward from the Fortune Divine Dynasty on the surface was nothing. Thank you, Eastern Heavenly Venerate, for helping me. Yishuin cupped his hands in thanks. It's nothing. However, after this matter is over, you must devote yourself to the Era battlefield, said the Eastern Heavenly Venerate. As the two of them spoke, the other Heavenly Venerates of the Fortune God Dynasty also arrived at the Heavenly Venerate Conference. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.